Chapter 577. Tap, 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 the sound of unhurried footsteps came from afar. The person looked at Hellion Vivian for a while, then his thin lips pursed into a straight line. He bent down and reached out to pinch Hellion Vivian's face. Hellion Vivian was in a deep sleep, and the man had no aura at all, so it was inevitable that she couldn't feel it. If it was someone else, Hellion Vivian would have already woken up. Seeing her like this, the man narrowed his eyes. He waved his hand, and a pure white fur cloak fell on Hellion Vivian's body. Hellion Vivian felt warm, and her little mouth moved. She tilted her head and slept even more soundly. Fire Qilin stood outside the hall and watched the man walk out. It didn't say anything, but its eyes were a little messy, full of gossip. Beligaju looked at it with an indifferent expression. What? Didn't you say that the cloak would be a waste if it wasn't used? Yes, it did say that. But this wasn't right. It had touched that cloak before, and it was extremely expensive. To make such a cloak, it would require at least 3 snow foxes. It was fine if its master made it for itself, but it had a feeling that this fur cloak was specially made for Miss Vivian. Master had never been so good to them. He and Azure Dragon even bought their own clothes with their own money. Okay. Don't mention the fur cloak. Fire Qilin lowered its head and thought for a while. Its eyes suddenly narrowed, and its thick claws touched its chin again and again. Why did it feel that there was something strange about the other party? Wasn't its master a little too attentive to this new prey? It seemed that it had to be careful when facing Miss Vivian in the future. Because its master was very likely to say one thing and mean another. For example, today's matter at the Sun Hall was clearly because its master changed his mind halfway. When she wakes up tomorrow, let her think carefully about whether she wants to stay by this king's side or return to the human world. Beligaju's voice was very deep, so deep that Fire Qilin couldn't tell if it was happy or angry. The Fire Qilin nodded as it listened. It thought that this was how kings usually dealt with their prey. However, unexpectedly, Beligaju opened his mouth again, his smile tinged with coldness. If she wants to go back, break her legs. When the Fire Qilin heard this, its head, which was about to continue nodding, froze. Break their legs. Does the king not want to let Miss Weiwei go at all? Azure Dragon also walked over at this time. Under normal circumstances, he would not speak, but today he spoke. King, your interest in that human far exceeds your interest in us. Oh. Beligaju smirked and did not deny it. The Azure Dragon continued, there are actually quite a few preys that you've set your eyes on, but you'll often lose interest in taming them halfway through. To be honest, you were very focused when you looked at that human just now. Although I don't know why, you would only be so serious when you're really interested in something. However, your seriousness this time makes me a little worried. After all, she is a human. So what? Beligaju's voice deepened. The Azure Dragon lowered its eyes and said, you should know that humans are much weaker than beasts, especially since this human's origin is still unknown. It seems that it will take some time for her to accept a master. I know. Beligaju smiled. That's why I'm so patient with her. Under normal circumstances, the more patient you are, the more you want to get. The Azure Dragon seemed to be predicting. Beligaju turned around and looked at it. Of course I want to get it, and I must get it. This is what I'm most afraid of. You're always so sure of what you want, but you can't control the human's thoughts. The Azure Dragon was telling the truth. Beligaju's eyes were cold. That's why I've been waiting for her to understand that I'm the only one who can make decisions in her world. Don't even think about leaving so casually. But she's a human. I'm afraid she won't be able to withstand your anger when the time comes. The Azure Dragon was worthy of being the one who understood Beligaju the best. It said in a low voice, the more you care about your prey, the more you'll use tricks. That's why she better realize this before I lose my patience. Otherwise, I don't know if I'll hurt her when the time comes. Beligaju's eyes turned cold. The Azure Dragon advised him, since she doesn't want to stay, why don't you let her return to the human world before you get angry? Bailey Jiaju paused in his steps and opened his mouth again. His voice was still slow and unhurried, but it carried a sense of oppression that no one could resist. I can't do it. She must be mine. The Azure Dragon looked at the man's arrogant back and let out a long sigh. When the king fell from heaven, the Buddha had said that if he insisted on doing this, he would suffer a heavenly tribulation sooner or later. Now, the king's heavenly tribulation wouldn't come, right? The night in the 10,000 Demons Palace slowed down. The nights here were always exceptionally long. Hellion Vivian didn't know how long she slept. Anyway, she slept comfortably. When she woke up, she didn't think much about it. She just wanted to see Beligaju as soon as possible. Since he didn't come to find her, it was the same for her to find him. Hellion Wei Wei's pair of clear eyes looked at the cage, and with a bang, she kicked it with her foot. With such a loud noise, the demonic beasts in charge of guarding her would definitely hear it. Their first reaction was to lock Hellion Vivian back inside. If the king's prey was lost, they would definitely be unlucky. But the king had already instructed them not to hurt anyone. So they didn't dare to make a move. This saved Hellion Vivian a lot of trouble. After a few turns of wind, she left the palace. She casually changed her clothes, buttoned her shirt, and walked towards the Hall of Light. She was smart, but when she arrived at the Hall of Light, she was still stopped. Those demonic beasts looked at her, their nostrils enlarged. With round eyes, they said in a very rough voice, "Miss Vivian, please go back." They really didn't give her any space. Hellion Vivian shook her head. Xiao Kuei, who came from the inner palace to get something, happened to see this scene. She snorted and said, "I was wondering who was shouting outside so early in the morning." "So it's you." "No way, you still haven't given up." Hellion Wei Wei glanced at her, her eyes slightly cold. Xiao Kuei was stunned by her gaze and suddenly became angry. "Who do you think you are? How dare you stare at me? Let me tell you, the king is very good to Sister and I. He will be going to see Sister and I later. If you don't know what's good for you, I will ask the king to teach you a lesson." "Teach me a lesson?" Hellion Vivian laughed. Suddenly, her body flashed and appeared in front of Xiao Kuei. Even Xiao Kuei, who had the ability to exorcise demons, didn't see how she moved at that moment. By the time she reacted, the other party had already picked her up and threw her to the ground. Chapter 578. Bam! Xiao Kuei was dizzy from the fall. Blood flowed out from her nose and dripped onto the back of her hand. She was in a sorry state. She immediately went crazy and bared her fangs and brandished her claws in an attempt to retaliate. Hellion Vivian grabbed her wrist and said coldly, "Even if he wants to teach me a lesson, what does it have to do with you?" She kicked her again. Xiao Kuei's internal organs were in pain from the kick. Hellion Vivian did not show any mercy. Her character had never been one to restrain herself. Moreover, she did not expect Beligaju to take care of an iPhone. An iPhone was a smart person. If yesterday's incident did not happen, she would have the confidence to win. But now, it was obvious that this person was different to Beligaju. "I'll say it again. Let me in." Hellion Vivian summoned wind from her palm. One of the demonic beasts blurted out, "The king is not in there. It's useless for you to go in." "Not in there." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows, "Then where is he?" The demonic beast was very proud. "Miss Vivian, please give up. I will never tell you that the king is in the devil's prison. It was only for a moment. All the noises in the hall stopped. The other magical beast standing beside it, whose chest was originally straight, almost choked to death when it heard its words. Hellion Vivian rubbed her chin and laughed. Devil's prison. Thank you. The demonic beast seemed to want to save the situation. But with Hellion Vivian's speed, she would not give it a chance to speak. She turned around and disappeared around the corner of the palace. What should we do? The demonic beast was stunned. The other demonic beast dragged it over and shouted, Why aren't you informing Boss Chilin? You're so stupid. What difference does it make if you have a brain? What about this woman? The demonic beast was talking about Xiao Kuei, who was struggling on the ground. The other demonic beast patted her back with its paw. She won't die. Let's go first. All right. A magical beast's brain usually didn't work fast, and even its movements were slow. Xiao Kuei unwillingly looked at the backs of the two demonic beasts as they left. She wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth with the back of her hand, and a thick killing intent flashed in her eyes. Damn that Hellion Vivian. What a slut. How dare he hurt her? Just you wait. She would definitely make her suffer a fate worse than death. She was going to tell elder sister and I now. Are you saying that Hellion Vivian has left the cage? Ni Feng stopped drinking the medicine. How dare she? Xiao Kuei wept and said, with that barbaric strength of hers, she even dared to hit me in front of a magical beast. What is there that she doesn't dare to do? She seems to have gone to find the king. Ni Feng's eyes paused for a moment before she asked, What about the king? What did the king say? Elder sister and you're finally concerned about the king's reaction. Xiao Kuei pursed her lips. That woman didn't see the king. I heard from the demonic beasts that the king went to the devil's prison to interrogate the prisoner. However, looking at Hellion Vivian's hasty manner, there's a high chance that she will ruin the king's plans again. When Ni Feng heard this, the corner of her mouth that was originally smiling sank again. However, this kind of thing was not urgent. Sooner or later, the imperial city would interrogate that prisoner. If they couldn't do it today, there was still tomorrow. However, Xiao Kuei's guess was right. Hellion Vivian had indeed blocked Beligaju's path before he entered the devil's prison. When Beligaju saw her, his eyes suddenly narrowed. Without turning his head, he said to the fire Qilin beside him, Are all the demonic beasts in the pandemonium dead? How can they let a person walk around so casually? At that moment, everyone could feel the cold aura emanating from his body. It was so cold that Hellion Vivian's scalp went numb. She looked up into those emotionless eyes and felt as if her heart was tightly clenched by something. Listen to me. What I said yesterday. Hellion Vivian wanted to say something. However, Beligaju acted as if she didn't exist and walked forward. It was as if he was not happy to see her here and was very tired of this matter. Hellion Vivian's fingers paused. She had never thought about what would happen if Beligaju hated her. That's right, who said that he would like her immediately when she appeared? This was not a dream, so it could not be done according to her wishes. Reality was often like this. If the clingy party did not realize it, then the annoyance would turn into disgust. When she thought of this, Hellion Vivian's heart suddenly shrank and her footsteps also stopped. Beligaju walked in front of her and said in a cold voice, What? You want this king to stand here and listen to your explanation? Did that mean that he was willing to listen to her? Hellion Vivian immediately smiled and followed him. Beligaju's attitude was still very cold, but there was still a chance. As long as there was a chance, as a domineering president, she should grasp it at all times. Therefore, when the two of them passed by the Styx River, Hellion Vivian did not think and picked a bunch of datura flowers and handed them to Beligaju. Beligaju opened his eyes and did not take the flowers in her hand. Instead, he asked her, "Where's the cloak?" "What cloak?" Hellion Vivian kicked the door open as soon as she woke up. She was so focused on explaining to Beligaju that she did not notice any cloak. Beligaju looked at her deeply. For some reason, that look made Hellion Vivian feel very guilty, as if she had done something wrong to let him down. Suddenly, Beligaju looked at her and smiled. He reached out his gloved fingers and pinched her chin as if he was pinching a domestic kitten. "Forget it, you should continue to stay in the cage. Maybe you will remember something after a few more days." Hellion Vivian. "So, you are smiling so beautifully just to lock me up better." "What? You don't like it?" Beligaju's originally faint smile lost its warmth and the expression on his face became indifferent. "Or do you want to go back to the human world? Anyway, you are not interested in choosing the Empress, right?" Hellion Vivian was speechless for a moment. "You can't say that." "Then what should I say?" Beligaju looked at her with a cold face. Hellion Vivian sighed. "Your Highness, can you not be so arrogant?" This time, Beligaju did not even bother to talk to her and turned to leave. Hellion Vivian quickly followed. "What I mean is, you saw it too. If I really want to go back, that cage can't hold me at all, you reminded me." Bailey Jiaju chuckled and interrupted her, his eyes slightly cold. "Sending two magical beasts to watch over you doesn't seem to have any effect. You should directly break your claws so that you can be at peace." Hellion Wei Wei was depressed and called out his name without hesitation. "Bailey Jiaju, can you listen to what I have to say before you speak? I'm obviously staying because of you, okay?" Chapter 579. The atmosphere froze in an instant. Hellion Vivian could clearly see Beligaju's pupils constricting slightly. She wondered if she had shouted too loudly and made him impatient. But she had to shout like that. He was very arrogant and had a cold expression on his face that told her to stay away from him. Of course, she had to finish her sentence quickly. Looking at the other party's silent expression and the obvious silence around them, Hellion Vivian couldn't help but clear her throat. So is this a confession?" The man finally spoke and looked at her casually. "Confession?" Hellion Vivian didn't want to argue with him at this time. She nodded and said, "Yes, a confession." "Whatever you say. Come here." Bailey Jiaju's low and gentle voice was like the night of a spring day, hazy and warm. It was easy for people to approach him, but it was hard to grasp. Hellion Vivian walked over and was about to speak when he suddenly hugged her. All of a sudden, she was pulled into his arms. Her nose was instantly filled with Bailey Jiaju's scent. Hellion Vivian could even hear the other party's heartbeat. It wasn't fast, but it was very strong. It was like the deep sea, as if it could settle the whole world. "Then you don't have to go anywhere. Just stay by my side." Hellion Vivian's ear was brushed by Beligaju's breath, and her whole body became itchy. However, she clearly realized that she couldn't promise him. Hellion Vivian didn't say anything. She just reached out and hugged his waist, rubbing her face against his fur cloak. Beligaju didn't get the answer he wanted. This made the warm smile on his face turn cold again. However, it wasn't as cold as before. He just reached out and pushed Hellion Vivian away. His voice was faint. "Did you not bathe yesterday?" "Bathe?" She had been locked in the cage and hadn't showered, but she wouldn't smell. Why would he push her away when he was hugging her? Beligaju glanced at her again, then instructed the fire Chelan beside him, "Go boil a bucket of hot water and send it to the Light Palace. Don't forget to bring a brush." "Yes." The fire Chelan lowered its eyes respectfully, but its eyes were looking in the direction of Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian was confused by its stare. When she followed Beligaju back to the Hall of Light, the man said, "Take off your clothes." She finally had an idea. "Are you planning to bathe me yourself? This is a reward for your performance today." Beligaju said it so casually. Hellion Vivian. What kind of stupid reward is this? Don't you know the difference between men and women? Also, why are you holding a brush that's used to brush animals? What? You don't like this shape? Beligaju followed her gaze and looked at his palm. The Tunshin likes it quite a lot. Hellion Vivian, then you go bathe the Tunshin. What does this have to do with the shape? Don't be jealous. Beligaju patted her head as if he was comforting a pet. The Tunshin is still young. I've bathed it more often, but I'll take more time to accompany you in the future. Hellion Wei Wei. Which eye of His Highness actually saw that she was jealous? Furthermore, why would she be jealous of a mythical beast? Take off your clothes now. After bathing, I'll take you out. As Beligaju spoke, he slowly took off the pure black gloves on his hands. Prey needed to be watched from time to time. She wouldn't always think of leaving. Hellion Vivian knew that once His Highness decided on something, there was no room for negotiation. She might as well appease him and tell him about an iPhone when they were bathing. But what Hellion Vivian didn't expect was that as soon as she stepped into the large wooden tub, he lifted up his inner shirt. The lines of the man's waist instantly made Hellion Vivian feel a strong sense of oppression. You don't have to take off your clothes to bathe someone, right? Beligaju smiled at her. It was so elegant that it could easily make one's heart beat faster. Just now, I decided to bathe with you. It's more convenient this way. Without giving Hellion Vivian a chance to refuse, Beligaju strolled in. There was a sexiness between his thin lips that was enough to disturb her stability. Hellion Vivian only felt that her whole body was a little hot, especially the places that were touched by him. It was as if they could burn up. Fortunately, Beligaju didn't do anything else after he came in. He just soaked in the tub and enjoyed the feeling of being soaked in the hot water. His presence was so strong that it was impossible to ignore. He looked at Hellion Vivian with his eyes. He pressed his wet black hair behind his head with one hand. The water droplets slid down the side of his face to his neck and then meandered down. He was so handsome that it made one's mouth dry. Sometimes, when that elegant sense of abstinence was broken, it would make people feel that he was a natural-born stunner. Hellion Vivian subconsciously wanted to drink water. In the past, when he dragged her into the hot spring, they always lingered to their heart's content. She also didn't notice that fatal attraction of his. Now, she actually felt that she couldn't escape. Hellion Vivian closed her eyes. When she opened them, she had already regained her clarity. She looked at Beligaju and tried to make her tone as calm as possible. Don't believe an iPhone about what happened yesterday. Beligaju's movements paused. This is your explanation. I know that she saved you before. She's different to you. If it were her, she wouldn't think of her savior in a bad way. Moreover, according to Xiao Kuei, an iPhone had saved Beligaju more than once. She must have been sincere before. However, she said, this time, she should be here to successfully set up the divine exorcism spell and then completely seal you in the underworld. Although I don't know why she had to come to the demon world to find you, her purpose of approaching you is definitely not simple. Beligaju laughed after hearing that, but there was no trace of warmth in his eyes. He looked up at her. What about you? Why did you approach me? I want you to come with me. Hellion Wei Wei looked into his eyes, more serious than ever. Beligaju suddenly leaned over and pressed his thin lips against her ear. His voice was extremely cold. You're not smart at all. I've always been crushed by your intelligence in front of you. Hellion Vivian muttered. However, Beligaju's side profile softened. Since you don't know how to speak, then speak less. As soon as he finished speaking, he took the fur bathrobe beside him and wrapped her up. The way he wiped her hair was as if he was wiping the fur of an animal. Hellion Vivian wasn't sure if he believed her or not. However, he was exceptionally patient with her today. He said that he would take her out, and he really did. He didn't take her to the Temple of Light. Instead, he directly carried her out of the pandemonium and went to the demon world's recreational area without bringing a single beast. Chapter 580. That's right, it was a place for entertainment. The atmosphere here was very much like Hellion Vivian's Halloween party in the 21st century. Everyone was wearing ancient robes and various masks on their faces. It was impossible to tell who was who. The only thing was that the openness of this place could be described with the word hot. It was different from the ancient world. After all, the demon world did not have so many restrictions. They knew how to enjoy themselves. Under the moonlight, they kissed each other unintentionally. Beligaju casually found a place to sit and crossed his legs. After a while, a gorgeous woman came over. Her intention was obvious. She seemed to want to put her hand on Beligaju's shoulder. However, after seeing Hellion Vivian, she was stunned. Human. Why are the men in the demon world more and more fond of humans? Could it be that after doing it, they can eat it in one bite? Hellion Vivian looked at her with a smile. His calmness piqued the girl's interest. She turned her amber eyes and said to Bailey Jiaju, I don't mind the three of us playing together. I mind. Beligaju casually threw something over. After the woman saw what it was, her expression changed. I didn't know it was you. I'll leave immediately. Hellion Vivian was curious. What did you throw? Cheelant's red fur. Beligaju's tone was very calm. Cheelant sometimes liked to eat low-level demons. Hellion Vivian thought that this was a good idea. Pretending to be his own mount, thinking about it carefully, if His Highness used his real identity to come to this place, no matter how cold he appeared, there would be women coming over. Pretending to be one of the 4 mythological beasts was the best way. However, using the Fire Cheelant's name to visit this entertainment place was a bit immoral. After all, the Fire Cheelant claimed that it never appeared at night. It was definitely a good mythological beast and the best choice for a husband. But reality was always cruel. Perhaps she should go back and tell the Fire Cheelant why it couldn't find its other half. Looking at the way His Highness threw the red feather, he couldn't be any more skilled. He definitely used this move often. Perhaps the Fire Cheelant still didn't know that his title of music every night had already spread throughout the demon world. Sigh. Being a mount for His Highness is quite tough. Achoo! The Fire Cheelant, who was embroidering with its head lowered, sneezed fiercely. It happily looked at the animal skin it had embroidered. It thought that as long as it brought this thing to the new little spirit beast tomorrow, it would definitely marry it shyly. After all, a virtuous spirit beast like itself was rare. The night deepened. Deep within the demon world, the revelry was still ongoing. Hellion Vivian sat there and drank the unknown tea in the cup. After almost half an incense's time, no one came again. She thought that it was over. Unexpectedly, after a while, a chubby demonic beast came over. That demonic beast seemed to be selling things. It looked at her and Beligaju and said, "Do you want a bag that's very popular recently? It's made by the mermaids themselves. It's very flexible. Do you have that bag now?" Hellion Vivian thought that since it was made by the mermaids, it must be very precious. After all, in the modern era, the things made by the mermaids were also very expensive. It was said that even their tears could be turned into pearls. It was rare in the world. She didn't expect that after Bailey Jiaju, who had been playing with the teacup with his head down, heard her words. He looked at her meaningfully. His deep eyes seemed to be full of smiles. Are you interested? Yes, I'm quite interested. If it was a treasure, of course she would want to see it. Beligaju's thin lips curled up. With a somewhat evil tone, he said to the demonic beast, then take out what you have, I'll choose. When that person heard this, he felt that there was a big business. Immediately, like a magic trick, he took out no less than 20 bags from his arms. For some reason, Hellion Vivian felt that the shape of the bags was a little strange. Beligaju's slender fingers moved inside. I don't like to use this, it's too thick. This is the thinnest. That demonic beast explained, you can't play too hard, otherwise it won't be effective. That thing will still run into the human's body. When that time comes, it will create a little demon, and you'll be the one in trouble. Wait a minute, what did he mean by creating a little demon? This bag is... Hellion Vivian's face suddenly heated up. Then, she saw Beligaju holding his chin with one hand in a mischievous manner, holding one in his hand. It's not interesting if it's too thick, but since you want it, let's buy one. Hellion Vivian was speechless. When did she say that she wanted it? Can you not make it sound so ambiguous? And she didn't even know that this was a condom in the beginning. Who would have thought that the underworld was so good at playing? It was even more advanced than what the ancient people thought. They knew how to use protection so early. Your ears are red. Beligaju's thin lips curled up. It seems that you really want it. How did you link my red ears to wanting this thing? Hellion Vivian lowered her voice. How did you link my red ears with wanting this thing? You humans usually don't mean what you say, only your body is honest. Beligaju casually leaned over, as if he was whispering into her ear, but this king has never used it before. If you insist on using it, this king can use it on you. Hearing this, Hellion Vivian's heart felt like it had been hit by something, and the back of her ear went numb. What did he mean by she insisted on using it? She was just curious. Take one of each. Regardless of whether she said anything or not, Beligaju still paid the demonic beast's gold leaf and took a few bags over. The demonic beast took the money, and before it left, it muttered to itself, I didn't expect women in the human world to be so passionate. Hellion Vivian was speechless. This feeling of being shot while lying down is so frustrating. You've completely misunderstood. The person who wants to buy is clearly a certain highness. Which one do you like? Beligaju didn't seem to have any intention of letting her go, and he leaned closer to Hellion Vivian, green or blue? Or something thinner? Hellion Vivian took a deep breath, and her voice was indifferent, I don't like any of them. If she chose, a certain highness would definitely continue to tease her with this matter. He must have known from the beginning that she didn't understand anything, and just wanted to see her make a fool of herself. A certain highness's bad sense of humor had always been like this. Coincidentally, this king doesn't like it either. Bailey Jiaju's slender fingers slid down her arm to her waist, gently rubbing it. The corner of his mouth curved into a beautiful arc. It's too dirty. But if it's you, it shouldn't be too dirty. Chapter 581. At that moment, Hellion Vivian could almost feel the depth in Beligaju's eyes. That depth made Hellion Vivian's heart beat wildly. She subconsciously wanted to get up. But she was pushed back down by him. Beligaju's face was very close. Hellion Vivian swallowed a mouthful of saliva and was about to lower her head. But she was pulled up by him and pulled to a dark corner. Hellion Vivian looked up at Beligaju. Isn't it too dark here? It isn't. Beligaju leaned over and put his hands on the wall behind Hellion Vivian. That angle made Hellion Vivian's heart feel like it was about to split open. Do you know what this king wants to do when you are at a loss like this? What? Hellion Vivian's heart was lifted up by the other side again. Beligaju moved closer to her. The smile on his lips was enough to captivate all women. The tip of his nose was less than 3 centimeters away from Hellion Vivian. Her breath became his scent. I want to use all the bags I bought on you. That kind of ambiguous smile was brimming with the smell of male hormones. His ice-cold voice actually spoke such provocative words. Wei Wei's heart almost stopped. You shouldn't have seen these things before. It seems like they don't exist in the human world. Beligaju continued, do you want this king to teach you? Hellion Vivian almost bit her tongue. No, I don't want to learn. Moreover, you haven't used them before, right? Are you questioning this king's ability? Beligaju raised the corners of his lips and revealed an evil smile, then give it a try. Woo! At that moment, Hellion Wei Wei's mind was so blank that it could not contain anything. A slightly cool and gentle touch with an irresistible force pried open her lips. She didn't even have time to react before her entire body was lifted up in his arms. Using her strength, he deepened the kiss and slowly slid across the tip of her tongue. The slower he was, the more obvious the palpitations in her heart became. Until Beligaju's tongue finally retracted. Hellion Vivian had no strength in her body. Her legs were weak, and she could only lie in his arms. Feeling the residual warmth, all the cells in her body trembled. It tastes really good. Beligaju held her so that her back was against the wall, and his thin lips fell on her collarbone. There is a kind of tea fragrance. She did drink tea just now. Hellion Vivian thought in a daze. The slight chill around her reminded her of where she was. She couldn't help but lower her voice. Not here. Don't worry, no one will come. The man held her waist, as if he wanted to taste her in that position. Hellion Wei Wei shuddered as she heard a sound coming from the side of her ear. Beligaju narrowed his eyes dangerously, and his deep eyes gradually became indifferent. It seems that this is indeed not a good place. Hearing this, Hellion Vivian finally breathed a sigh of relief. Unexpectedly, Beligaju laughed again. You don't seem to like using up these things all at once. All at once. She would die if she used them all up. Since you don't like to use them so quickly, then let's use one every day after we go back. When Beligaju said this, he still had a faint smile on his face. Hellion Vivian couldn't help but have the urge to let him use up all of them at once. If he used one every day, didn't that mean that he had to use it every day? Hellion Vivian thought about it, and felt her waist hurt, and her face was burning. It didn't fade at all. Since he couldn't enjoy himself to his heart's content, Beligaju naturally wouldn't stay here any longer. He paid another handful of gold leaves, held Hellion Vivian, and directly flew into the pandemonium, which was shrouded in clouds. Large clusters of black feathers rose into the air. Beligaju didn't really touch her, but just like the night before, he pulled her into his embrace. His noble appearance made it impossible for people to calm down. Hellion Vivian definitely couldn't sleep. If Beligaju hadn't said those words before, her mind probably wouldn't have wandered in that direction. Now that she could see the things they bought from outside just by tilting her head, Hellion Vivian felt a little uncomfortable. If you move again, this king will really use those things on you. Beligaju slowly opened his eyes, and the oppressive aura emitted from his long, narrow eyes made Hellion Vivian instantly stop moving. I won't move anymore. Hellion Vivian said as she changed the topic. I heard that when you first came to the demon world wasn't as bright as it is now, and was filled with darkness everywhere. Since it's the demon world, of course there can't be sunlight. Beligaju's voice was very low, and there was an indifferent elegance in his calm voice. This place is always like this, you can't feel any heat, and there can't be any light. But it's very interesting, at least more interesting than those people in the heavenly realm. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Heavenly realm. prey shouldn't ask so much. Beligaju looked at her indifferently, then closed his eyes again, and his black hair cast a deep shadow. Hellion Vivian looked at his thick eyelashes that would make any woman jealous, and went over to hug him. Actually, the human world isn't that interesting, it's all the same, it's just that there's an extra sun, there are many more treasures in the demon world. Is this little thing comforting me? Beligaju's thin lips curled up mockingly, he didn't think much of it. Is your body temperature because there's no sun in the demon world? Hellion Vivian smiled faintly, but it's okay, my body temperature is usually too high. Beligaju smiled, it was indeed very warm. Hellion Vivian said and fell asleep. Before she fell asleep, she was thinking about how to bring Beligaju back in the shortest time possible, completely unaware that she was so cold at night that her whole body was shivering, and she still didn't let go. Beligaju looked at her with his dark eyes, then raised his cold hand and touched her face. Hellion Vivian murmured softly, her lips were pale, but she still didn't want to let go of Beligaju's waist, as if she was determined to warm him up. Beligaju's pair of eyes deepened. He raised his hand and the surrounding torches were all lit up. The warmth of the torches hit the bed. Only then did Hellion Wei finally stop trembling. She turned her face and slept even more deeply. Beligaju seemed to like this position very much, and he hugged her tightly in his arms, the corner of his mouth faintly raised. Hellion Vivian was woken up by the heat. She remembered that His Highness was as cold as ice at night. How could he be hot? She opened her eyes and looked to the side, then she realized what had happened. When she turned around, she saw that Beligaju was looking at her with his chin propped up. His black hair was a little messy, but he looked very relaxed, the corner of his mouth curved up, and his collar was tilted to one side. He was so sexy that it was going to explode. Chapter 582. Hellion Vivian couldn't help but lean over and kiss him. Beligaju paused for a moment, followed by a devilish smile. It seems that you like this king a lot. I already said that I like you. Hellion Vivian rubbed her uncomfortable stomach and smiled, but can we discuss this later? I haven't eaten since yesterday, and now my stomach hurts a little. Beligaju's smile suddenly turned cold. You didn't eat yesterday. Yes, won't you be locked in a cage? Hellion Vivian thought that he wouldn't forget so quickly, right? Beligaju's eyes darkened, but he didn't say anything else. Instead, he bent down and carried Hellion Vivian, draped his fur cloak over her, and ordered his subordinates to steam more than 10 baskets of meat buns. Hellion Vivian looked at the steaming meat buns helplessly, and the corner of her mouth twitched. She was being raised by the glutton of heaven again. Did he want to feed the pigs with so many meat buns? You don't like to eat. Beligaju naturally noticed her expression. Hellion Vivian shook her head. No, I'm not picky about food. The glutton of heaven loves meat buns the most. Beligaju's side profile was elegant. If you don't like it, you can ask them to change it to something else. Hellion Vivian smiled. We'll eat this today, and change it tomorrow. The freshly steamed meat buns will definitely be delicious. As Hellion Vivian spoke, she reached into the steamer basket and took out a steaming meat bun, then extended it in front of Beligaju. For you. Demons don't need to eat. Beligaju's expression was indifferent. All right. Hellion Vivian retracted her hand, and just as she was about to bite the meat bun, who knew that Beligaju, who said that he didn't need to eat, suddenly lowered his head and bit the meat bun on the other side. He was faster than her, and Hellion Vivian could even feel the tip of his tongue sweeping across her lips. Tastes good. Beligaju smiled meaningfully. Fire Qilin watched from the side and silently raised its head to look at the ceiling. When did its master have a new hobby of teasing its prey? This was too perverted. However, Fire Qilin didn't know that last night, Beligaju did something even more unexpected, and that was to bring the bag back to the pandemonium. That Master. What's that in your hand? Of course the fire Qilin recognized that thing, but why did it feel so out of place when it was being held by its master? Didn't he hate that kind of thing the most? Beligaju curved his thin lips and didn't answer its question. Instead, he turned to Azure Dragon and said, "It said that human women value their chastity very much." The smart Azure Dragon had basically figured out what his master was thinking. He nodded and said in a deep voice, "In the human world, only on the day of marriage, women will give away their chastity. Once a man becomes their man, they will be devoted to him and will not think about anything else. Unless there is a man in the woman's heart that she deeply loves, otherwise, the marriage contract and chastity are enough to make them stay. It's fine as long as they can stay." Beligaju pinched the bag and said, "Go to the human world and ask around. See how the weddings there are." "Yes." Azure Dragon and Fire Qilin respectfully retreated, but their hearts weren't as calm as they looked. They had followed their master for at least 100 years. Ever since the day the demon world was established, they had never seen their master interested in any woman. They thought that they would never see their master marry anyone in this lifetime, and that he was destined to be single for the rest of his life. They didn't expect him to have the idea of getting married. However, their master had always been unscrupulous when it came to his prey. If he wanted to keep Miss Weiwei in the demon world, it wasn't impossible for him to do this. But, that bag, would their master really use it? As a divine beast that had never experienced it before, Fire Qilin felt too shy. The next day was the day of the demon world's queen selection. Beligaju sat on the throne and listened to the discussions of the demons. He played with the black jade ring on his finger and listened casually. His left hand lazily supported the side of his face, and he didn't say anything. Xiao Kuei was very well informed. After hearing about this, she went back and told Anai Feng, "Sister Anai, did you hear? From today onwards, the queen selection will begin. I heard from the demons that those who aren't chosen will be sent away. Sister Anai, do you want to leave?" Anai Feng's hand that was drinking medicine paused. "Those who weren't chosen will be sent away." No, she couldn't leave. "Xiao Kuei, go and find out what the king has been doing recently." Anai Feng always felt that some people were too cold. Although they were nice to her, they never showed their faces. Xiao Kuei bit her thin lips and said, "Sister Anai, after the incident at the Divine Light Basilica, I can't go there anymore." Hearing this, Anai Feng slowly tightened her grip on the quilt. How did things become like this? Could it be that the king hasn't been to the prison? Let's wait a little longer, there's still time anyway. The one who felt that time was pressing was Hellion Vivian. Sometimes, when she saw Beligaju bathing her, she even wanted to use some kind of drug to knock him out and kidnap him back to the human world. But, thinking about it carefully, this idea was too stupid. A person like His Highness would probably know what she wanted to do before she even made a move. What's this? Hellion Vivian watched as he reached out and took out a pure black object. It seemed like he was measuring her size. Beligaju's voice was very calm. He only said 2 words, "Empress Crown." Hellion Vivian finally noticed that the pure black object was inlaid with black gemstones and demon feathers. They were put together in large clusters and emitted a unique elegant aura. Empress Crown. Does he want me to be his demon queen? If this happened on a normal day, Hellion Vivian would definitely be very happy. But now, the moment she saw the Empress Crown, the Fire Qilin's calm and distant voice suddenly appeared in her mind, as if it came from another world. "Don't wear it. You will be trapped in the demon world for the rest of your life." Trapped in the demon world for the rest of my life? Then wouldn't I never be able to go back? Hellion Vivian's face turned pale. Without thinking, she hit the Empress Crown that Beligaju was about to hand to the ground. Slap! Perhaps it was because the hall was too quiet that the sound was particularly crisp and ear-piercing. The Empress crown fell on the spotless black marble. The gemstones inlaid in it reflected a cold light. Helene Vivian didn't need to look to know that Beligaju's expression was not good. Her neck was cold. She could clearly feel the chill coming from that person's body. Chapter 583. It seems that you really don't want to participate in the Queen selection. Beligaju's eyes were cold as he took back his hand and stood up. His movements were elegant and noble as usual. He was so cold and distant that almost no one dared to approach him. Helene Vivian was afraid that he would leave, so she subconsciously grabbed his sleeve. It's not like that. Since it's not like that. Beligaju stood tall and the dim light blocked all the expressions on his face, then put on the queen crown first. He thought that after he said this, his little prey would definitely do as he said. Because she was very obedient. But Helene Vivian didn't move. She clenched her hands and refused him for the first time. I'm sorry, I can't. In the dark shadows, Bailey Jiaju was still standing in the same place. His elegant posture, straight back, and head that never lowered. His fingers that were wearing black gloves slightly stiffened, and the smile on his lips disappeared without a trace. Even the most basic elegant disguise of a demon had completely disappeared, leaving only an icy coldness behind. Master. Kirin and Azure Dragon came in from the outside and reported excitedly, "We have already figured out the wedding customs of the human world. It seems that we have to wear red robes, spread a bed of peanuts and red dates on it, and carry a sedan chair into." Speaking of this, Azure Dragon and Kirin paused, not because of anything else, but because of their master's abnormally red eyes. How long had it been since they saw their master like this? However, Bailey Jiaju himself did not notice anything. He smiled wickedly. "Why don't you continue?" Azure Dragon was stunned and then lowered its head. Beligaju calmed the churning in his chest. 10 years or 100 years. He had never been so patient with humans as he was today. What he liked the most was to tear apart their bodies with his black fingertips and enjoy the heat of their blood. Only at that time would he feel warm. Now that someone had finally appeared, he didn't feel so bored anymore. But it was obvious that this person didn't want to stay. How ridiculous, hee. Beligaju laughed coldly as a demonic red light appeared in his eyes. Helene Wei Wei looked at the crown that was scattered on the ground, her shapely eyebrows creased. Did she make things worse and worse? For the next 3 days, Beligaju did not appear again, but it was obvious that her quality of life was getting better and better. The 10,000 Devil Hall was also setting up, and there were bright lights everywhere. During this period of time, only Azure Dragon had come to the Light Palace. His voice was very faint, but the meaning he expressed was very clear. The Demon Queen's crown was personally made by the Demon King. It is the same for every Demon King. Helene Vivian immediately felt a tug at her heart. Her eyes fell on the crown that was obviously broken. She closed her eyes and thought for a moment before making a difficult decision. However, at this time, Beligaju was busy dealing with the traitor because someone in the prison was trying to escape. The prison of the demon world had always been indestructible, so of course, the people who tried to escape would not have a good ending. Beligaju walked over unhurriedly and looked down at the black-clothed man who was pressed to the ground by the demonic beasts. He raised his eyebrows slightly. "This king will give you 2 options. One is to tell this king who is your spy in the 10,000 Devil Hall, and this king will send you back to the human world. 2, if you don't say anything, this king can make you suffer a fate worse than death." The black-clothed man originally did not want to escape, but he was anxious because there was no news of the Divine Exorcist seal. Now, in order to get out, he could only use the second option. He lowered his eyes and said with a voice filled with pain, "Some time ago, when the demonic beasts passed by the exorcist temple, they picked up a woman. Instead of saying that she is my spy, it would be better to say that her main mission is to bring you to the human world. Bailey Jiaju smiled, but that smile didn't reach his eyes. Do you think that if you say that, I will believe you? She is just an ordinary human, not a member of the exorcist temple. Indeed, she is not a member of our exorcist temple, but she has always loved Senior Jing. She is willing to do anything for the exorcist temple because Senior Jing once said that as long as she can protect your designated sacrifice and bring you to the human world, he will take her as his wife. The black-clothed man pressed his arm painfully, but he could barely resist Beligaju's piercing gaze. Beligaju looked at the towering tree not far away and did not raise his head. He said faintly, "Even if this king is lured to the human world, you people from the exorcist temple cannot do anything to this king." That was true in the past, but we received news that the divine beast Tunshin by your side is undergoing a heavenly tribulation. It is impossible for it to appear in the near future. If you are unable to gather a few divine beasts, your magic power will obviously weaken. Beligaju did not want to continue listening. He curved his thin lips and said with a hint of ridicule, "So that's the case." No wonder she did not want to be his empress, but wanted to bring him to the human world time and time again. She even inquired about the Tunshin. It turned out that all of this was just because she loved another man. Hee hee. Human feelings are really stupid. Beligaju smiled. His fingers hidden under his long sleeves could not help but clench so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The fire Qilin stood beside him and cried out in alarm, "Master, your hand." Bailey Jiaju followed its line of sight and looked over, as if he didn't see that his own finger was bleeding. His expression was very indifferent and cold. There was not a trace of fluctuation in the tone of his voice when he ordered, "Kill him." "You!" The black-clothed man's eyes suddenly shook. "Didn't you say that you will let me go if I confess?" Bailey Jiaju put his finger between his lips and licked the bloodstains on it. His demonic nature was like that of Satan who walked out from the darkness. "You even believe in the words of the devil. You're really so stupid that it's annoying." Swish! Blood fell like flower petals in full bloom. Beligaju walked on the blood-stained road and stepped into the light palace that he had avoided for the past few days. His elegant black figure was particularly dazzling in the sea of roses. Initially, Hellion Wei Wei was still thinking of an excuse to meet Bailey Jiaju. Now that she saw him suddenly appear in front of her, her whole body heaved a sigh of relief. She strode over and held his hand. What she didn't expect was that the man didn't even look at her and pulled out his arm. His lips and teeth were cold, but there was a seductive smile. "Do you really want me to go to the human world with you?" Hellion Vivian looked at the hand that was thrown away and subconsciously nodded. "Good, very good." Beligaju curved his thin lips, but that smile was cold in his eyes. He turned around and ordered the demon beast beside him, "Someone come, send Miss Vivian out of the demon world." Chapter 584. The use of the word "send" was too civilized. With two magical beasts standing in front and behind her, it was almost as if they were detaining her and driving her out of the city. Hellion Vivian clenched her fists and coldly looked back at Beligaju. "If you are doing this because of the crown, then I can almost restore it to its original state." However, Beligaju did not pay attention to her, as if he had already made up his mind. His handsome side profile carried a slightly cold light, and his chiseled facial features were particularly outstanding. His whole body emitted a coldness that repelled people thousands of miles away. "Send her away." "Yes." The magical beasts did not give Hellion Vivian a chance to speak again, because it seemed that their king was tired of this woman. Hellion Vivian had always known that he had no patience for things that he did not like. But Hellion Vivian did not expect that one day, she would also be treated so impatiently by him, her chest fiercely clenched, as if she had been poured in countless amounts of pain, as if she was being crushed by needles. A light breeze blew past, and countless datura flowers swayed with it. A faint fragrance lingered in Helene Vivian's nose, and it would be a lie to say that she was not sad. But this kind of thing could never solve problems. Helene Vivian looked at the palace that was getting farther and farther away from her. In the end, she decided to make a move. Narrowing her eyes, she skillfully kicked up with her long leg and kicked the face of the magical beast that was escorting her out of the city. Bang! With such a big movement, the leader in front definitely heard it. Just as he was about to turn around, he was kicked a few meters away by Helene Vivian. The two magical beasts had never seen a woman that was so good at fighting, and their eyes were filled with deep astonishment. Helene Vivian bent down and said in a faint voice, "You are his people. I don't want to hurt you, but I can't go back alone like this, so I can only let you sleep for a while." As soon as she finished speaking, Helene Wei moved her hand and knocked out the two demonic beasts in black. She even took off one of the demonic beast's clothes and put it on herself. This way, she could return to the center of the pandemonium without being stopped. She did not know why Beligaju suddenly wanted to send her away. Her intuition told her that there should be something else besides the crown. The sound of footsteps echoed back and forth in the spacious palace. "King, the Queen's selection banquet is about to begin. This is the costume that the witches have chosen for you." Azure Dragon brought over a set of black robes, which was embedded with inlaid gemstones that were as dark as ancient ink. Those were the stones on Beligaju's thumb ring. In the demon world, the darker the color of the gemstones, the more mysterious the power of the gemstones. This gemstone had always been in its master's blood coffin, and even Azure Dragon did not understand why their king suddenly thought of taking it out. Beligaju looked at the dazzling light in front of him, and his expression returned to normal. "Tell them, there won't be any banquet." No one would know that he was stupid enough to want to give his gemstone to a human. He wanted to let the entire demon world know that she was not just a simple prey. But in the end, Beligaju chuckled, and his thin lips slowly curved up. "Qilin, go to the river Styx outside the city. Pass down the order, no one is allowed to leave the demon world." "Yes." Fire Qilin respectfully responded, but in its heart, it thought that its highness was becoming more and more perverted. He was the one who wanted to send people back to the human world, and now he was also the one who wanted to prevent people from leaving the demon world. It was obvious that he did not want Miss Weiwei to leave. Then what about Miss Weiwei? Even if it understood, it had to ask clearly, so that its master would not punish it. Beligaju slowly opened his mouth. "It is one thing for this king to let her leave, but it is another matter whether she can leave or not." Fire Qilin. "Master, is it really okay for you to be so shameless? Why aren't you going? Do you want this king to give you more radishes to eat?" Bailey Jia Ju's pair of ice-cold eyes looked at the Fire Qilin in front of him. The light emitted by the torch sprinkled on his face, sketching out his perfect outline. That was the ultimate iciness and danger. Fire Qilin did not dare to waste any time, and directly flew to the moat outside the city. After waiting for half an hour, he did not see Helene Vivian's shadow. In the end, he summoned the two demonic beasts, but looking at their bruised faces, he more or less understood what happened. "Where is Miss Weiwei? Please don't think what I think. Master will kill me." The demonic beasts were still in a daze. They looked left and right, then slowly said, "That woman disappeared after hitting us. Boss, do you think she ran away? We are not going to eat her, why would she run away?" Fire Qilin listened to the conversation between his two subordinates, and only felt waves of pain in his head. "It's over, it's really over this time." According to the king, he did not want Miss Weiwei to leave at all. She was really gone. How should I explain this to the king? In the pandemonium, countless demons were still partying in the silent night. There was only a tall and slender figure sitting on the proud throne, swirling the wine cup in his hand. His long and narrow eyes seemed to be somewhat absent-minded. Fire Qilin braced himself and walked over, and said in a more tactful way, "Master, I did not find Miss Wei Wei." "What do you mean, you did not find her?" Beligaju's tone sounded normal. This gave the Fire Qilin the courage to say everything that needed to be said. "After Miss Wei Wei knocked them out, we don't know where she went. I think she ran away, escaped." As soon as these words came out, Bailey Jiaju's body seemed to have set up a defense in a flash, an ice cold that was hard to resist. He curved the corners of his mouth, no expression could be seen on his handsome face, only that pair of eyes was already cold to the extreme, when his heavy line of sight fell on the Fire Qilin. Fire Qilin felt its scalp turn cold, and lowered its head in fear. At this moment, Beligaju thought of the words he heard in the prison. He was negligent. She chased after him, saying that she liked him for too long. He actually thought that she really liked him, and would not be willing to leave. But the man she truly loved was not him. Beligaju thought of this, and his breathing unconsciously became heavier, and his 10 fingers tightly grasped the only thing in his hand. "Pa!" A crisp sound rang out. The wine cup shattered in his palm, and his eyes were filled with blood. Fire Qilin panicked, but did not dare to approach the angry man. Bailey Jiaju acted as if nothing had happened. He indifferently stood up and gracefully wiped the bloodstains off his fingers. He took a step forward and directly walked outside. His deep eyes overflowed with a chill as cold as a glacier. "Hellion Vivian, do you think you can escape?" Chapter 585. No one has been able to escape unscathed after provoking this king. In the 10,000 demons' palace, countless demons looked up at the corner of the fluttering cape. The vibration from the blood seemed to be able to burst out from the blood vessels. It was so hot that it could almost burn the heart. They looked at each other in the swaying main hall. No one knew what had happened, but they were certain that this burning sensation came from their king. What happened to the king? Why was he so angry? And behind that anger, there seemed to be an imperceptible loneliness. The Fire Qilin blinked. Why did it feel that the person who was hurt this time was the king? It must have seen wrongly. Pang! At this time, after dealing with the last magical beast guarding the Light Palace, Hellion Vivian dragged that person away and then sat at the entrance of the hall. After pretending for so long, she was already tired. "Let's rest first." No matter what, this was Beligaju's bedroom. He had to come back. She should take advantage of this time to fix the crown. In a while, she could have a showdown with a certain highness. In the current situation, the only way was to have a showdown. She was afraid that a certain highness would not believe her when the time came. Whatever, if he didn't believe her. She could still hug his leg and not let him go. Hellion Vivian let out a long sigh and comforted herself. This was a necessary skill for a domineering president to chase after someone. When dealing with a certain highness like this, she had to be thick-skinned. In short, she had to bring him back. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and fiddled with the crown. Her little face was unprecedentedly serious. "Look, it's the human that the king raised." A little demon passing by saw Hellion Vivian and sniffed. "Her smell is so sweet. I really want to take a bite." But it's strange that the king didn't bite her. Another little demon pursed his lips in disdain. "That doesn't mean anything. The king has nurtured countless souls, and which one of them didn't leave behind a corpse in the end? It's just that it's not time yet." Hellion Vivian heard the conversation between the two little devils and found it quite interesting. She tilted her head and listened. Her thin lips curled up from time to time. She looked 70% handsome and 30% lazy. Her black eyes shone like stars. The little demon looked over, slightly absent-minded. Demons were born with an irresistible desire for beautiful things. Although the human in front of him wasn't the most refined, he had a mysterious air about him. No wonder the king chose to keep her in captivity. It was indeed strange that he had never bidden her. In the demon world, only partners would be treasured. As for the prey, under normal circumstances, there would be a mark left on it. Thinking of this, the little devil glanced at Hellion Vivian again, but he didn't dare to stay here any longer. It was said that the king was in a very bad mood today. They had to steal the pastries here and leave quickly. Otherwise, they would be ordered around by the king. After the two little devils left, Hellion Vivian was the only one left in the light palace. She leaned against the door and didn't know how long had passed. Beligaju walked in from outside. When he saw the little head, his eyes narrowed and his footsteps also stopped. The fire Qilin behind him was originally very tense. Now that it saw Hellion Vivian, it immediately let out a sigh of relief. So the Miss Vivian they had been looking for the whole day was here. Wait a minute. Didn't she escape? Why did she come back? No matter what, it was fine as long as she came back. If they couldn't see her figure again, the entire demon world would collapse. The fire Qilin turned its head and looked at its master's expression. The sudden sound of footsteps made Hellion Wei Wei, who was asleep, open her eyes. She looked up and saw Bailey Jia Ju standing in front of her, wearing a cloak. The exquisite workmanship of the cloth wrapped around his body, making him look slender and tall. He was also covered with snowflake-like mink fur, which looked like it came from an extremely cold place. The most eye-catching thing was the pair of black suede gloves on his hands. They looked as if they were tailor-made, fitting and exquisite on his fingers, as elegant as his second layer of skin. Hellion Vivian didn't think and directly reached out to hug his long legs. The fire Qilin was speechless. Beligaju didn't understand what she was doing. He lowered his eyes and saw that she had grabbed a mark on his robe. His voice was cold. Let go. No way, she didn't say anything and he was already angry. Hellion Vivian raised the corner of her eyes and insisted on not letting go. Beligaju's face was surrounded by the moonlight, looking noble and elegant. His eyes looked like an amber lake, unfathomable. I'll say it again, let go. Hellion Vivian didn't let go. According to His Highness' character, if he didn't like it, he would definitely shake her off. He didn't shake her off, so there was still hope. At this moment, a clear sneer came from not far away. Big sister and I, look, some people are praising her too much by saying that she is thick-skinned. His Majesty has already told her to let go, yet she is still clinging on to him and not letting go. Hellion Vivian couldn't be more familiar with Xiao Kuei's voice. She turned her head, and the coldness in her eyes made Xiao Kuei, who was talking just a moment ago, shiver. As if aware of the discord between the two, Ni Feng glanced at Xiao Kuei. Don't talk nonsense. I'm not talking nonsense. Xiao Kuei felt that her chance had finally come. Usually, when she confronted this bitch, the king wasn't around. Now, it was obvious that the king hated her to the core. With Ni Feng around, she didn't believe that she couldn't kill Hellion Vivian. She's a wild woman from God knows where, clinging on to the king. Xiao Kuei's eyes were full of mockery. She's so shameless in the demon world, so when she's in the human world, wouldn't she be even more open? Maybe she already has a man. Beligaju's eyes turned cold. He didn't say anything, but turned around. Hellion Vivian looked at her hand that was shaken off again, and the temperature in her heart instantly dropped. Did he believe Xiao Kuei's words? Xiao Kuei, don't say any more. Ni Feng reached out and pulled Xiao Kuei back. She gave her a warning look. This is Miss Vivian's own business. Don't talk too much. Xiao Kuei saw that Beligaju was looking at her, so she didn't listen to An Feng's words. It was harder to distinguish between the truth and lies. Sister and how can I talk too much? When Hellion Vivian was picked up, her clothes were clearly disheveled. Maybe she was thrown there after having sex with the disciple of the Exorcist Temple. You know a lot. This sentence was said by Beligaju. He smiled, and that kind of gentle arc could almost make the world lose its color. Chapter 586. Xiao Kuei's face turned red in an instant. She said shyly, I'm also worried that the king will be deceived by this two-faced woman. Hearing this, Bailey Jiaju strolled towards her. His posture was so graceful that it could only appear in a comic book. Large clusters of black feathers fluttered down from his body. There was no longer a cynical smile on his face. His handsome and cold face was faintly discernible and bewitching. Xiao Kuei's face turned redder and redder. Her heart was beating non-stop. However, at this point, Bailey Jiaju seemed to have thought of something and paced back again. Hellion Weiwei was still immersed in her own little disappointment and appeared a little listless. When she saw him walking back, she puzzledly raised her eyebrows. No one would have thought that Beligaju would bend down and cover her eyes with his hands. He said in a low and pleasant voice, Close your eyes. Close my eyes. Why? Are you going to do something wrong to me? This was Hellion Vivian's first reaction. After all, she felt that a certain highness' current behavior did not seem like he had forgiven her. Beligaju did not forgive her, but, if you see me kill someone, I will be very troubled. So, you better close your eyes. Who are you going to kill? Me. Hellion Vivian felt like she was being hypnotized. The man's voice was like sand slowly flowing through her ears, with indescribable enchantment. Beligaju did not deny it. He only glanced at the crown in her hand, then, are you going to close your eyes or not? Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes, I don't look good when I die. You better think about it again. Beligaju looked at her and said indifferently, it will be done soon. Don't open your eyes. The surroundings fell into darkness. Hellion Vivian did not nod or shake her head. Xiao Kuei, on the other hand, had a look of schadenfreude on her face. This bitch was finally going to die. What could be more delightful than this? However, what she did not expect was that the man's target was her. She didn't even have time to see his movements clearly before she heard the sound of her collarbone being crushed. Then came the pain of her tongue being cut open. That kind of bone-piercing pain made her scream with all her might. However, the man did not stop because of this. Instead, he curled his thin lips and shattered her left leg bit by bit. Feng, who was standing close by, was so shocked by this scene that she was speechless. Xiao Kuei's blood splattered on her face. She was afraid that she would never forget this scene for the rest of her life. She watched as the people she was familiar with slowly turned into a bloody mess in front of her. Only then did she realize how terrifying the man in front of her was. It was so terrifying that she felt an unprecedented chill from the bottom of her heart. He was indeed a devil. A real, unscrupulous devil. Hellion Vivian, who had her eyes closed, did not know what had happened. That was because the action of closing her eyes in Beligaju just now was not that simple. That was the demon's hint. Once it was given, it would cause a person to temporarily lose their 5 senses. Of course, except for their sight. Hellion Vivian's hearing was also affected to a certain extent. Just as she was wondering why she couldn't even sneak a peek, Lin Mingya said, "You're right." On the other side, Bailey Jiaju had paralyzed Xiao Kuei, but he did not let her die. He just casually ordered the person beside him, send her to the 5th prison, those magical beasts should be hungry by now. Yes. Fire Chelan glanced at the clueless Hellion Vivian. Sure enough, the king treated Miss Hellion Vivian differently. This was the first time that the king cared about who saw it when he attacked. It looked at Miss Ni, who was standing on the other side. She could not stand it anymore and started to vomit. Sigh, how pitiful. After all, those who had witnessed the entire process of the king's killing could not eat a single bite of meat for a month. Even Fire Chelan had to admit that the king's killing method was too cruel. Ugh, ugh. Xiao Kuei, who was being dragged forward, moved her mouth toward Ni Feng with all her might. She could not say anything now. She was in so much pain that she broke out in cold sweat. She just wanted Ni Feng to save her life. Ni Feng wanted to save her too. Her face was so pale that it was almost drained of blood. King, Miss Ni, the king usually does not change his decision under normal circumstances. Fire Chelan turned sideways and blocked Beligaju's back. Seeing that its master did not say anything, it was even more sure that it did the right thing. It straightened its back and said, "You should go back to your room and rest. After all, you are still injured." Fire Chelan's words cut off Xiao Kuei's thoughts. In the end, she still did not understand why she would die. However, that did not mean that Ni Feng did not understand. That person treated Hellion Vivian very differently. Ni Feng's fingers stiffened. She looked at Fire Chelan in front of her and forced herself to speak. "Xiao Kuei is my sister after all. I can't change the king's decision, but I must leave her body intact. Of course. After all, you saved the king. We will leave her body intact." Fire Chelan turned around and looked at its master. It was obvious that the king's mind was no longer on this matter. Ni Feng knew that this was the best ending. However, she did not expect the situation to develop like this. She subconsciously clenched her fists and calmed down. If it was just based on the plan, the effect would be better if Beligaju cared more about Hellion Vivian. No matter how different it was, once the seed of suspicion was planted, it would not be so easy to remove it. Clean this place up. After saying this, Bailey Jiaju wanted to bypass Hellion Wei Wei and walk into the bedroom. He really didn't want to talk to her anymore. If it was not for the fact that she still had her eyes closed, he would have asked, "Are you done? Can I open my eyes now? Actually, I think you look very handsome when you kill people. Why don't you let me see? If you say so." Beligaju did not think that she was like a little canine that followed behind him and hugged his leg when he was not paying attention. "Are you done?" Hellion Vivian opened her eyes. They were clear and lazy. Your hands, there is a strong smell of blood. Did he just kill someone?" To be honest, she thought that the person he wanted to kill was her. Because even now, she could still feel the strong displeasure from him. Beligaju ignored her. Hellion Vivian thought for a while, then raised the crown in her hand. "I fixed it. Do you think this king will want an old thing?" Beligaju's voice was very cold. Hellion Vivian froze. She felt that the crown in her hand was thousands of kilograms heavy. It was so heavy that she could not breathe. "What do you mean by old thing? Do you believe what Xiao Kuei said just now?" Beligaju did not say anything, he just walked past her. Hellion Vivian took a deep breath. "I do have a man in the human world, but that man is not anyone else, it is you." Chapter 587. Hellion Vivian, do you think that I have a negative IQ? Beligaju glanced back at her. The mockery in his eyes made Hellion Vivian's heart clench. However, she still stood up and continued with clear eyes. "I know this is a bit ridiculous, but it's just your past now, and the current you is just a fragment of your soul." "What do you mean?" There seemed to be some ripples in Bailey Jiaju's eyes. Hellion Vivian knew that he was willing to listen to her, so she explained clearly how she came here, what the fire Qilin did, and why he was sealed by the divine exorcism seal. That's why I told you to be careful of an iPhone. Love rivals and whatnot, they must be eliminated from the beginning. However, after listening to her, he didn't seem to have any reaction at all. You don't believe me? Hellion Vivian raised her left hand, trying to make herself look more convincing. I still have the red soul sealing rope that the fire Qilin gave me before I came here. It said that as long as I cut this rope, I can go back. But I won't cut it unless you come with me. Beligaju smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Hellion Vivian, you know so many things, but why don't you know that if you want to use the divine exorcism seal to trap me, I have to go to the human world first? What? In an instant, Hellion Vivian felt as if she had fallen into an ice cave, as if someone had splashed a basin of cold water on her. From top to bottom, there was no place that wasn't cold. No one had ever told her this, and perhaps even the fire Qilin didn't know this. But from the beginning, she kept asking Beligaju to follow her back to the human world. How could he believe her with such a motive? Just kill me. Hellion Vivian had already started to give up on herself. At this moment, Beligaju suddenly grabbed her hand. Was what you said just now true? Which one? Hellion Vivian subconsciously asked. Beligaju looked at her coldly. Your man in the human world is me. Of course it's true, we're already married, and you promised that you'll only love me in this life, and never leave me. Alright, the last sentence was added by Hellion Wei herself. She was thinking that since he didn't believe her anymore, she might as well go for broke. Beligaju looked at her deeply for a long time, so long that Hellion Vivian felt that her face was about to be seen through. He then slowly opened his mouth and said, I don't seem like the kind of person who would say such things. You know that you'll never be gentle in this life. Hellion Vivian whispered. Bailey Jiaju's long and narrow eyes slowly narrowed. What did you say? I said what I said just now, I said. Hellion Vivian smoothed things over at the right time. Beligaju's tone was finally not cold. This does sound like something you would say. Then you believe me. Hellion Vivian felt that it was a bit inconceivable. Based on the current situation, she didn't believe herself. When did a certain highness become so pure? Beligaju looked at her and suddenly laughed, trapping her in the middle of the wall, because this king found that if this king doesn't believe you, you'll keep hugging this king's leg. Other than this method, what else do you know? I know a lot of things. Hellion Wei was very knowledgeable when it came to this. She did not study the 108 ways to woo a wife for nothing. However, she continued, you can't possibly believe me just because I hugged your thigh for a while, right? I still plan to do something else. Beligaju's eyes darkened. What else do you want to do? Kiss you. Hellion Vivian's voice was languid, and there was a smile at the corner of her mouth. You don't know, but you used to criticize my method of chasing people. You said that it was better to just give them directly than anything else. A familiar coolness spread over, and Hellion Vivian's following words were buried in this kiss. When it ended, as if he was reluctant to leave, the tip of Beligaju's tongue lightly licked the seam of her lips, and he said in his usual cold tone, like this? Hellion Vivian's ears turned red, and she resisted the numbness and cleared her throat. Why do you believe me? Because you clearly ran away, but you came back, and you're hugging a crown like an idiot and sleeping here. Beligaju reached out and hugged her. The empty space just now was finally filled. Hellion Vivian. Why does a certain highness have to attack me every time he praises me? Also, I'm the only one who knows about the soul fragments, and I've never told anyone about it. Beligaju stroked the red string on her wrist, including this soul-sealing rope. It was originally mine. This time, it was Hellion Vivian's turn to be puzzled. how did you know in advance that you would have a soul fragment? I didn't know in advance, but from the moment I fell from the sky, my soul could be controlled, combined, or disintegrated by me. Beligaju said casually, it seems that the divine exorcism seal you're talking about is indeed very powerful, otherwise, I wouldn't have to disintegrate my soul. Hellion Vivian finally found an opportunity. The main thing is that you were betrayed, the divine seal is secondary. At this time, she had to remind him of the existence of her love rival. Beligaju obviously saw through her little thoughts, and his thin lips curved into a beautiful smile. I'll go to the human world with you. No, they're probably waiting for the moment you go to the human world to activate the divine exorcism seal. You can't go. If it was in the past, Hellion Vivian would probably be very happy to hear this, but if she let him go to the human world now, it would be equivalent to letting him experience the pain of the past again. Bailey Jiaju looked at her with his deep eyes. His fingers slid across her face, feeling the warmth of her skin. How could I fall in love with such a stupid person like you? Am I stupid? Wait, didn't you just say that you like me? Hellion Vivian's eyes lit up. At that moment, Beligaju really felt that he was raising a canine animal, the kind that wouldn't break no matter how hard he fell. There had never been anyone who could make him feel so confused and unable to push her away. Because she didn't seem to know what fatigue was, she was like the sun in the human world. But later, he realized that it wasn't that she didn't feel tired, otherwise, she wouldn't have been so tired that she fell asleep at the door. Beligaju reached out and carried her, then put her into his blood coffin. The blood coffin seemed to have a hypnotic effect, and it was filled with his scent. Hellion Vivian felt her eyelids grow heavy, and she could faintly hear his low voice, the only way I can go back is to let things continue as they were. Otherwise, there won't be the me you know. As soon as he finished speaking, the man in front of her transformed into a cloud of fog, and entered the human world with the fire Qilin. Then, an overwhelming Buddhist light seeped into the demon world, and the divine exorcism seal began to descend. Hellion Vivian, who was sleeping in the blood coffin, held the crown in her hand, and when she woke up again, it was already in another world. Chapter 588. The surrounding air was very cold, lingering in the winter. It was a vast expanse of white, and she could even see the breath that came out of her mouth. Hellion Vivian stood in the middle, and for a moment, she was confused. This was the palace. Heavy snow filled the air. As the north wind blew, the snow and dust were like blooming dandelions, drifting away and landing on the white stone steps. Not far away, one could even see palace maids and eunuchs walking back and forth. This was indeed the palace. But the most important thing was, why was she in the palace? Did she go back? No, that was impossible. According to Fire Qilin, after collecting a soul fragment, one would enter the location of the next soul fragment. Hellion Vivian looked down at the crown in her hand and clenched her 10 fingers. She seemed to be able to see that person's last appearance when he turned around. Let things continue the way they were supposed to. How could Hellion Vivian not understand the meaning of this sentence? It was because she understood too well that her heart ached a little. She moved her fingers and suppressed her emotions. When she looked up again, she had regained her usual clarity. Since this was the location of the second soul fragment, then Beligaju shouldn't be far from here, right? But which palace in the palace was this? Why was it so quiet? She had been to the cold palace before, and it wasn't like this. But other than the cold palace, which other palace had so few palace maids? Hellion Vivian took a step forward. She didn't know which door she pushed open, but the dazzling sunlight suddenly hit her face. Hellion Vivian instinctively raised her hand to block her eyes. She looked to her left, facing the direction of the light source. Because she had just opened her eyes, they were still a little uncomfortable. He could only see an arrogant figure standing under the golden light. The figure was very small. Helene Vivian thought it was little Seven. But when the figure came closer, she realized that it wasn't little Seven. The figure was wearing a black brocade robe with a large cloak outside. If this kind of cloak was worn by other children, it would definitely look out of place. But on this boy, it complemented each other so well. His handsome features were like the night sky that was propping up the sky. He was neither cold nor indifferent, and there was not the slightest expression on his face. All he had was coldness and the power to command the world. Ice-cold blood flowed out from between the gaps of the boy's fingers, but it was as if he didn't feel it. His face was expressionless as he walked forward. Until he saw Helene Wei Wei, that pair of eyes that didn't have any ripples suddenly turned cold. Helene Vivian also felt this hostility, but what shocked her wasn't this. It was that boy. He was clearly a miniature version of His Highness. Helene Vivian was stunned. The scene she was seeing now was somewhat familiar. When she was trapped in the formation, Ni Feng tried to help her understand the Beligaju of the past. Now, not only on his hands, but also on his back, there were needle marks left by his mother. Different from what she saw in her dreams, the boy in front of her was too real. He was so real that Helene Vivian could feel the coldness in his eyes even if she didn't get close to him. In other words, the soul fragment this time was His Highness when he was young. Helene Vivian was a little confused. After the boy glanced at her, he didn't give her a second look. His left hand pressed on his right arm, and he walked into another palace door. Helene Vivian followed him in without thinking. This palace was indeed more deserted than the other palaces. This should be the palace before the fire, no wonder she felt unfamiliar. Bang! The wooden bucket sank into the ancient well. Little Beligaju was holding the wooden rope with one hand, trying to pull up the bucket of water. But his left hand was too painful, and he wasn't used to using it like before. He originally wanted to just let it go. Unexpectedly, a pair of fair and slender hands suddenly appeared in front of him, and with a strong lift, the wooden barrel in his hand was taken away. Bailey Jiaju turned his head and saw a face with a faint smile. He had just seen this face. It was a woman who appeared out of nowhere. This Highness has never thought of exposing you, and you don't need to curry favor with this Highness. Beligaju pushed her away, his voice so indifferent that it was almost emotionless. Helene Vivian originally thought that a certain Highness who had become smaller would be easier to deal with. She didn't expect that Beligaju, who had experienced the most complicated side of being capricious, would be the most difficult to deal with. Wasn't his action of drinking and sleeping a little too aristocratic? He was still pretending to play the flute. How old was he? About 7 or 8 years old. Why did he make it look like he was in a blockbuster? Needless to say, those eyelashes were really long and thick, as black as ink. Helene Vivian reached out and wanted to touch them. She was from the Appearance Association, and she really couldn't resist this fatal temptation, probably because he didn't expect Helene Vivian to do this. The boy was stunned. His cat-like eyes narrowed dangerously. Do you not want your hand anymore? Why are you so cold since you were young? Helene Vivian decided to educate her husband while he was still young, so that it would be troublesome for her to chase after him in the future. You're so cold, you won't be able to make friends. Is that so? The little boy's expression was quite arrogant and evil, and a chill appeared in his eyes. Helene Vivian felt that this child's gaze was too strange. She reached out and touched his lotus-like little hand. What are you thinking about? Why are you smiling so creepily? I'm thinking about how to kill you. The little boy was expressionless as he spoke coldly. Helene Vivian paused for a moment, then pulled him over and hugged him. She did her best to ravage him. You don't have to be so rough. You have to be gentlemanly to ladies. No, you don't have to be gentlemanly to all ladies. You have to remember my face. You only have to be gentlemanly to me, and you don't have to be like that to anyone else. You have to remember my face, because in the future, you will fall in love with me until you can't extricate yourself, understand? The little boy seemed to be angered by her, and his face darkened. Was this woman not afraid of death? She was really long-winded. He had never seen anyone more long-winded than her. Seeing that this hug is so warm, I won't throw you over the wall. The little boy thought fiercely in his heart, but when he heard the woman's last sentence, he couldn't help but mock her. Me? Fall in love with you until I can't extricate myself. Woman, have you not woken up yet? It's good that you're daydreaming. Why don't you take a look at how old you are? I don't like old people like you. Hellion Wei Wei. This is not cute at all. Could it be that he was born with this poisonous tongue? Would it kill him to comfort her? She was only 17 years old. How was she old? Chapter 589. Alright, the age gap between them was indeed a little big. However, don't you think that older sister is more interesting? Hellion Vivian asked very seriously. The little boy smiled coldly. He looked at Hellion Vivian as if he was looking at a maid. He said slowly, older sister. You. Auntie is more like it. I must teach you a good lesson today. Hellion Vivian really felt that the miniature version of His Highness was really asking for a beating. That arrogant look really made people want to hang and beat him up. The little boy crossed his arms and leaned against the door frame. His posture was elegant. A classic example of being angry out of humiliation. Hellion Vivian took a deep breath and told herself not to argue with him. He was still young, he was still young. Moreover, your breasts are not worth looking at all. The little boy's beautiful lips twitched. His indifferent voice sounded as if he was narrating a fact. Will any man like you? Hellion Vivian felt that the little bit of rationality left in her had been burned away. He was still young. Young my ass. He even knew how to look at breasts. You, come here. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. The little boy did not move. He stood in the same spot and looked at her coldly. Hellion Vivian did not say much. She was just joking to lower his guard. Now that he was much less vigilant, she would not be beaten to death if she attacked him. Woman, what are you doing? This was the first time a woman dared to lift his robe in public. The boy's voice was very deep. It was so deep that one could not tell whether he was happy or angry, but it made one's scalp tingle. At that moment, Hellion Vivian thought that she was facing the adult Baligaju. However, that small face was there. Hellion Vivian was much bolder. Her fingers crushed the ointment and slid it across his back where the wound was. The little boy froze and turned to look at her. His long and narrow eyes slowly narrowed. Crack, after the last piece of firewood in the furnace was burned, this empty palace was already cold enough. Who would have thought that there was a little boy sitting opposite her who could make the surrounding temperature even lower? Hellion Vivian threw other things into the stove, trying to make the fire burn brighter. She said to the little boy, "Is it warmer now?" The little boy didn't say anything. That cold look in his eyes was as if she owed him a lot of money. Hellion Wei Wei felt that she had to explain, "I've observed, there were only the two of us in the courtyard just now. Don't worry, what you're worried about won't happen at all. Other than me, no one else saw your bare back." The little boy still didn't say anything and just looked at her coldly. Hellion Vivian really couldn't bear such a gloomy gaze. "Wasn't I in a hurry to apply medicine for you just now?" The little boy smirked and said in a cold tone, "You're in such a hurry to apply medicine that you've taken off my robe. How can I apply medicine if I don't take it off?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Don't you know how to give the ointment to me and let me apply it myself? The little boy brushed his robe and sat back on his exclusive wooden chair. He crossed one leg over the other, put his elbow on the wooden table, and supported his chin with his index finger. He looked at her elegantly and lazily. Helene Vivian, what kind of gaze was that? It was like he was mocking her intelligence. After she became an adult, it was fine if he called her stupid. But now he was only 8 years old, and he was already mocking others. This was too arrogant, too presumptuous, and too condescending. Also, why would a child like him wear black gloves? This kind of obsession with cleanliness was indeed cultivated from a young age. Woman. The little boy put down the teacup in his hand and slowly adjusted his black gloves. That pair of enchanting eyes was as cold as ice. Are you going to tell me yourself, or do you want me to send you to the Imperial Household Department and let them ask you where you came from and why you came to the Imperial Palace? Why did you try so hard to get close to me? His Highness was indeed not easy to fool. Whether it was him who had grown up, or him who had been a child. They were all very smart. Helene Vivian lowered her eyes. Based on her experience in the demon world last time, she told Baligaju everything without leaving out a single word. Firstly, it was because this person thought too much. Even the slightest clue could make him suspicious. It was better for her to tell him everything. It was better than being suspicious in the future. Secondly, if he heard these things, he might go back with her. Reality proved that the second possibility was completely impossible. Because the little boy's face was so calm that she felt like she had said a bunch of nonsense. She couldn't help but feel a little depressed. There are some things that you said that are worth believing, the little boy said casually. Really? Helene Vivian instantly became spirited again. She grabbed the little boy's hand and shook it back and forth. You still have some redeeming qualities, child. The little boy's mouth curved up. His voice was very pleasant to hear. For example, when I grow up, I will laugh at you for being stupid. It's very normal because you are very stupid to begin with. Helene Vivian, did you just say that when I grow up, I will lock you up? The little boy tapped his fingers on the wooden table, as if he was deep in thought. Wei Wei creased her long, shapely eyebrows and shrewdly asked, I've said so much, why are you only interested in this matter? The little boy said calmly, I see that you don't like it, so I will avoid locking you up in the future. Compared to locks, he preferred that kind of chain. He didn't know if this woman was telling the truth, but he really wanted to put her in his prey pool. It was quite interesting to watch her stretch out her claws. Brat! Helene Vivian stretched out her arms and hugged him. You can have this kind of awareness, it proves that you are very good. And, very good. Brat? Ha! The little boy raised his beautiful eyebrows. Good, very good. It seems that this kind of prey should be locked up with iron chains or something. That's the expression. Helene Vivian seemed to have discovered something. She pinched the little boy's overly handsome face back and forth. You are a man. If you have something to say, just say it directly. You are always like this. It looks like someone is going to be unlucky. You also know that someone is going to be unlucky. The little boy curled the corners of his mouth, and a trace of blackness flashed in his eyes. But the two of them didn't continue talking because a woman dressed as a palace maid was walking towards them outside the door. She was carrying a food box in her hand. She should be here to deliver food to Baligaju. But her attitude was not good. Even her greeting was in a strange tone. Your Highness, it's time for lunch. Why haven't you washed your hands? If the Empress knows about this, she will not be happy. Chapter 590. Hearing this, Helene Vivian glanced at the palace maid who spoke. She thought that this person was really tired of living. She actually dared to speak to His Highness in such a tone. Was she not afraid of angering His Highness? At this time, Helene Vivian had long forgotten that the person standing in front of her had not yet become the #1 person in the world who could kill with one look. He was still a child, and an unfavored prince at that. Bailey Jia-ju knew very well what an unfavored prince should do in the imperial palace. He silently looked at the food box that appeared in front of him, then walked to the front of the wooden basin without saying a word. When he was washing his face, there was no trace of expression in his eyes. Helene Vivian looked at his small figure and only felt a lump in her throat. She had never seen His Highness like this. That person had always been aloof and never put anyone or anything in his eyes. Even the emperor could not do anything to him. But now, even a palace maid could mock and ridicule him. Helene Vivian did not like this to begin with. However, that palace maid did not know how to restrain herself. She glanced at Baligaju and muttered in dissatisfaction, "Really, why am I so unlucky to be arranged to deliver food here? You think that serving the royal family is your bad luck?" Helene Vivian smiled faintly. The corners of her mouth were slightly curved, and it was very beautiful. Bailey Jia-ju, who was washing his face, paused his movements, lifted his pair of beautiful and long eyes, and looked toward Wei Wei, who was speaking. A trace of light flashed through the depths of his eyes. The palace maid raised her eyebrows and sneered, "Looking at your appearance, you just entered the palace, right?" "That's right, that's what I think." "What? You still want to make trouble for me? Do you know who I am? You don't know the rules at all. I'm warning you, don't meddle in other people's business. If you anger me, I have plenty of ways to deal with you." Little girl. Little girl. Helene Vivian licked her thin lips. How long had it been since she heard someone call her that? How should she put it? She really wanted to beat someone up. The palace maid looked at her with disdain. She didn't put these two people in her eyes at all. One was a prince who wouldn't resist no matter how they bullied him, and the other was a new palace maid who just came in. What could they do to her? "You're not convinced?" "That's right, I'm not convinced," Helene Vivian said with a chuckle. She stepped forward and kicked the palace maid. Helene Vivian was very skilled in fighting. She didn't use martial chi. With just one kick, the palace maid didn't come to her senses for a long time. With his head buzzing, he looked up at Helene Vivian. You dare to hit me? Isn't it natural for me to hit you?" Helene Wei Wei crouched down and patted her. "You're just a palace maid, yet you dare to treat His Highness like this. Beating you is already a light punishment. If I drag you down and behead you, you deserve it." The palace maid stared at Helene Vivian. Her face was extremely embarrassed, but she knew that Helene Vivian was not to be trifled with. In the past, it was the third prince who complained a little, but he never said anything to the retired emperor. How many days had it been? Almost 10 days. That child didn't even dare to fart. Why didn't she bully him? If he didn't make the empress unhappy, she wouldn't have to come here to deliver food. Gradually, her courage grew and she had forgotten about Bailey Jia-ju's identity. Now that she was reminded by this new little girl, she couldn't help but feel guilty. She endured the pain and stood up. She didn't say anything more. She glared at Helene Vivian and ran out of the palace. However, there was more resentment in her back that couldn't be ignored. Helene Vivian didn't put this palace maid in her eyes. Since she hit her, she wasn't afraid of the empress behind her. It would be best if that woman came to find her. She would teach her a lesson. Look at how cute His Highness was now. Although he was a little sharp-tongued, at least he was more normal. He wouldn't kidnap people casually. That empress actually did it. She was simply crazy. Maybe in the future, His Highness wouldn't be able to distinguish between people and prey because of the Empress. After being abused from a young age, even the most outstanding child would grow up crooked. And the person who abused him was his Empress mother. When Hellion Vivian thought of this, she glanced at the little boy not far away. He was standing there quietly. His black hair fell down and covered his face, making it impossible for people to see his expression. Hellion Vivian inexplicably felt a tug in her heart. She walked over and hugged him. "Little brat, don't worry. In the future, with me, no one can bully you." After saying that, she added, "Not even your Empress mother." Beligaju was still thinking that the palace maid couldn't stay. If she stayed, she might expose this stupid woman. When Hellion Vivian hugged him like this, in an instant, his mind went blank. The little boy helplessly reached out to support his forehead. It seemed that he could only wait until it was quiet at night. He had to replan his method. Although this woman looked stupid, she was actually very smart. Just take the palace maid as an example. She knew what the other party was most afraid of. The stiff kick and the understatement of the threat were enough to make the other party feel a sense of oppression. However, when doing things in the imperial palace, they had to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. Beligaju's eyes darkened, but he didn't want her to find out that he was killing people, so this time there couldn't be blood. He couldn't use a knife, which made it more difficult for him to kill people. If someone found out, he, as a prince, would be completely excluded. Because he knew better than anyone, no one would accept a prince with a vicious behavior as the heir. In the past, when he encountered this kind of problem, he would usually spend a long time to solve it. Every step had to be calculated accurately in order to avoid any accidents. This time, it was indeed a little rushed, but as long as he put in more effort, everything wouldn't be a problem. In fact, he wasn't a person who liked to put in effort. But for his prey, he could only take a little risk. Beligaju looked at the face in front of him that was full of worry for him. His hands really itched. He wanted to tie her up tighter and tighter. "What are you thinking about?" Hellion Vivian was strange. Why couldn't she see through a child's mind? When he grew up, she couldn't see through him. He was only 8 years old now. Why did she still feel that there was a story in his eyes? Was it because of her nerves? Hellion Vivian reached out and grabbed her hair. The little boy saved his body from her arms and said in a cold voice, "This Highness is thinking about what this Highness will eat in the future if you beat her away. You don't have to worry about this." Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips into a smile. "When I came in just now, I found a lot of fish in the river outside. Let's roast fish tonight." Chapter 591. The little boy frowned. Grilled fish. Only Love Jew brand grilled fish. Hellion Vivian looked at him with a smile. "What do you think? This name is not bad, right?" The little boy looked at her and said slowly, "It's such an ordinary name. What are you so happy about? How is it ordinary?" Hellion Vivian widened her eyes. "That's your name and my name." The little boy raised his eyebrows. "Your name?" "Vivian." Hellion Vivian seemed to have thought of something and said, "Oh right, you must remember my face and my name. When you choose a concubine, choose carefully. Don't choose some Hellion Jower. That way, I will have to deal with my love rivals." On one side, Hellion Wei Wei was still fighting for her own benefits. On the other side, the little boy's thin face was already feeling a little hot. Only Love Jew. Wei Love Jew. This woman is really... I've never seen anyone more talkative than her. The little boy turned around and poked the food box with his finger. When Hellion Vivian saw his actions, she took the opportunity to look at the food in the box. It would have been better if she didn't look, but once she did, her whole body turned cold. It's winter and that palace maid let you eat this. Cold rice, stir-fried cabbage, and meat, but the meat was so fat that it made people lose their appetite. She doesn't have the guts to do that. The little boy smiled. Helene Vivian didn't know if it was an illusion, but she felt that there was something wrong with that smile. The little boy was a little absent-minded. He picked up the food box and fed it to the sparrows outside. Helene Vivian felt that her eyes were playing tricks on her. After all, His Highness was like an automatic refrigerator after he became an adult. Wherever he went, he would freeze. He was aloof and otherworldly. Not to mention feeding small animals, he would have to wash his hands for a whole day just to get close to them. His Highness was obviously much kinder now. It seemed that as long as she taught him well, he would definitely not have any thoughts of tying her up in the future. However, these sparrows are not dead, the rice can be eaten. The little boy's handsome side face was still indifferent, but his eyes were more mocking. Helene Vivian was speechless. So, he fed the food to the sparrows because he wanted to test if it was poisonous. Cherishing little animals and whatnot. She was really overthinking it. However, even the food had to be personally inspected. It seemed that the situation was worse than she had thought. Just like what Baligaju said, the palace maid didn't have the guts to tamper with the food. She was one of the Empress's people, so her food and clothes were not bad. Although she would embezzle from the royal family, she would not make it so ugly. Something must have gone wrong with the food box in the imperial kitchen. And the person who could cause problems in the imperial kitchen should at least be an imperial concubine. Suddenly, Helene Vivian thought of the Empress from the Morong family. Thinking about it carefully, she should still be an imperial concubine, right? For an imperial concubine to be able to reach so far, it was clear that the current Empress did not care about Baligaju. In addition, there was the rumor that the eldest prince had died a long time ago. The eldest prince should be 14 or 15 years old now. If there were no accidents, it should be time for him to be in the limelight. However, the retired emperor, who was not in the capital, only doted on the third prince. The relationship between them was not just a little bit subtle. In other words, it was not the former Empress Morong, but the former eldest prince who was secretly bullying Baligaju. What was wrong with these people? Why couldn't they see a child living a good life? His own mother and father did not care about him. As a prince, his life was not even as good as that of a rich family's son, but he still had to endure these schemes. The more Helene Vivian thought about it, the more upset she felt. Her eyes deepened as if she was thinking about something, and a serious look appeared in her eyes. The reason why a certain highness was in such a situation was because he had not yet hunted the fire Qilin, so his martial chi had not been fully displayed. Secondly, it was because he did not have any relatives behind him, so others could not see what advantage he had in fighting for the position of crown prince, which was why they dared to treat him like this. From a certain point of view, Baligaju had long lost the qualifications to fight for the position of crown prince in this huge battle of the court. Originally, she was the empress, and her birth was nobler than any other prince. However, because the empress did not care, she was not liked by the emperor, causing everyone to not care about this prince. The eunuchs and palace maids in the palace, as well as the generals and ministers outside, all knew that a prince who could not become crown prince was destined to not have a day of prosperity. That was why they dared to bully a certain highness so that they could obtain better power in the future. Helene Vivian slowly clenched her hands. Didn't they look down on her highness? Then they would counterattack and let these people see who was the one who would obtain the position of crown prince. Helene Vivian decided that as long as she could stay here, she would help him, clear the obstacles little by little, and send him to that position. Just as Helene Vivian was lost in her thoughts, a little girl dressed delicately walked over from not far away. Just like in the dream, the little girl was still very sweet. Her face was white and tender, and she wore a light-colored long dress with a pink fur cloak. She was as cute as a princess, probably the kind of girl that all boys would like when they were young. First, she looked at Helly and Vivian, as if she was surprised that there was a servant here. Then, she looked in the direction of Beligaju, bent down, put down the food in her hands, and turned around to run, as if she was afraid that Beligaju would speak to her. Helly and Vivian was originally holding a branch in her hand, which was used to catch fish, but now, she felt a little pain in her hand. She opened it and found that when she was absent-minded just now, a small thorn had pierced into it. Beligaju held the food and looked at her without moving his expression. Helly and Vivian had a smile on her face, but there was no warmth, probably because she was tired. I remember that you don't have the habit of accepting food from others. The food she brought is not poisonous. Beligaju's voice was very faint, and his eyes seemed to follow the girl into the distance. Helly and Vivian looked at him and said in a low voice, "This is the first time you trust someone so much. Don't tell me that you really like the old Helly and Vivian." "What?" The little boy's eyes were originally looking at the ice hole on the surface of the lake. If it was here, he wouldn't have needed to use a knife to kill the palace maid without anyone noticing. All he had to do was wait until the sky turned dark and push her into the ice. That would be enough. Helly and Vivian looked at him and shook her head, still smiling. Nothing. He was still young, so there was no point in her asking him. She would wait until she brought him back. Now, there was nothing more important than waking him up. Chapter 592. Since there's nothing else, come up quickly after you're done catching the fish. The water is so cold, aren't you? The little boy looked at her indifferently, as though he was looking at an idiot. After saying this, he turned around and left with the food. Helly and Wei Wei followed behind him, feeling extremely unbalanced in her heart. Who was she being so cold for? Wasn't it all because she wanted him to eat a good meal? In the end, he hadn't even grown up, yet he had already learned how to flirt with other women. As Helly and Vivian thought about it, she used more strength to chop the firewood. She had a sullen expression the entire time. The little boy looked at her from the side, not understanding what she was angry about. The good thing about Helly and Wei Wei was that her anger disappeared very quickly. After busying herself for a while, a smile appeared on her face again. She reached out and flipped the fish over, then applied a layer of oil on it. She found a few fruits, crushed them and applied the oil on it. In an instant, the aroma wafted out. What was the big deal about being able to send food? She could even cook. As the saying went, to conquer a person, one had to conquer his stomach. She could be considered someone who had experience in love. Since she could handle the adult version of Beligaju, she could also handle this miniature version. At the thought of this, Helly and Vivian smiled even more beautifully. She even hummed a tune. When the fish was roasted just right, it would release a fragrance. The little boy stood at the side and listened to her instructions. He added another piece of firewood to the fire. Helly and Wei Wei saw that he was extremely adorable, especially since this child was relatively cold and aloof. Under the illumination of the fiery red bonfire, he appeared extremely well-behaved. Helly and Wei Wei looked at him and could not help but lean over and give him a kiss. After kissing him, she even smiled at Beligaju. The little boy immediately stopped throwing the match and turned his head, completely not looking at Helly and Vivian. Helly and Vivian was like a playboy who had flirted with a pretty girl. She continued to roast the meat happily. She cut a knife and handed it to him. "Try it. How does it taste?" The little boy glanced at her and said indifferently, "You want to kiss me again while I'm eating meat?" Having her thoughts exposed, Helly and Vivian paused and smiled. "Am I that kind of person? In the future, don't just casually give birth to relatives." The little boy slowly educated her. He bent down and took a bite of the grilled fish. The fish was very tender, and when he bit into it, the fragrance lingered in his mouth. He couldn't help but take another bite. Seeing that he liked to eat, Helian Wei Wei took the opportunity to brainwash him. Let me tell you, the saying of marrying a virtuous wife is not for nothing. When you choose a consort in the future, you must find someone who can cook, especially someone who can make grilled fish. The little boy raised his eyebrows. Someone like you. Little brat, you really know what to do. Helian Vivian giggled and said, I'm just like that. I'm in the hall, I'm in the kitchen, I'm in the army, and I'm in charge of guns. Moreover, I also know how to cut off peach blossoms. You don't know this, but when you grow up, you will have a lot of peach blossoms. Without me, you definitely won't be able to stop them. After the little boy finished listening to her, he ate another mouthful of grilled fish and said unhurriedly, by so many people. Isn't it good to like them? Why should this prince stop them? Helian Vivian. What he said made sense. She actually had no words to refute it. Little brat, come here. Let's talk about loyalty and uniqueness. Helian Vivian felt that the boy must be educated from a young age. You can't be like your father. It's not right to have 3 palaces and 6 courtyards. It's easy to have weak kidneys. Do you know what weak kidneys are? The little boy crossed his arms and looked her up and down. So, the only person who will like you in the future is this prince? Helian Vivian felt a little guilty when she heard this, but the corners of her mouth curved up, of course. Liar. The little boy turned his face and continued to eat the grilled fish. Did this stupid woman think that he was as stupid as her? She was so good-looking, how could no one like her? Helian Vivian always knew that a certain prince was smart, but she didn't expect him to be so smart. She shouldn't have exposed herself, right? How did he know that she was lying? However, Helian Vivian, who had read a lot of books, knew that in this kind of situation, the easiest way to smooth things over was to take advantage of the situation and confess. This was what the domineering CEOs in the books did. She had to apply what she learned. Thus, Helian Vivian sat a little closer to the little boy and lowered her voice in an attempt to make her look more affectionate. It's their business that they like me. I've only ever liked you. Hearing this, the little boy obviously paused for a moment. Helian Vivian thought to herself, you're touched, aren't you? Humph, she didn't believe that she couldn't win over an 8-year-old brat. Unexpectedly, the little boy looked at her and sneered, they. It seems that there's more than one. Woman, you're so fickle. How did this prince fall for you? Helian Vivian, no, why did she feel that something was wrong? She was clearly the one who was educating a certain prince. How did it become a certain prince educating her? This made Helian Vivian depressed. Who said that young people were easy to fool? The one in front of her was really too difficult to deal with. This kind of person couldn't be persuaded even if she wanted to. However, this prince can promise you that I'll consider you when I choose a consort. The little boy's tone sounded again, and there was a hint of indifference in his indifference, but there's a condition. Helian Vivian originally thought that she wouldn't be able to persuade him. Now that she heard him agree, her eyes lit up. What condition? You can't let other men like you. The little boy said indifferently, since you know how to cut off peach blossoms, I'll cut off yours too. After Helian Vivian heard this, she smiled very straightforwardly, no problem. Wasn't it just not letting others like her? This was too easy to handle. Anyway, when the time came, her face would turn black, and not many people would like her. You have to be absolutely loyal to this prince. The little boy stood up and looked down at Helian Vivian who was squatting in front of him. There was a faint trace of gold in his eyes. Helian Vivian nodded, okay. Loyalty is a must between lovers. Very good. The contract was established. The little boy smiled. She was finally persuaded by him. Helene Vivian also felt that it was very good. She didn't realize that she had sold herself at all. She lowered her head and happily ate the grilled fish in her hand. The little boy looked at her again. Don't eat too much fish. Why? Helene Vivian thought that if he dared to say that she was fat, she would definitely drag him over and beat him up. The little boy moved his fingers and threw the things that he had just picked up to her, and these. I'm not eating. Helene Vivian was very stubborn. Although the pastries looked good, as a military tycoon with a backbone, she definitely couldn't eat the things of her love rival. Chapter 593. The little boy's thick eyebrows furrowed, and his voice was a little cold. You're not eating. If you're not eating, why did you keep staring at these things just now? If I knew you weren't eating, I wouldn't have taken them. From what he said, it seemed that he took these pastries for her. In an instant, Helene Vivian laughed and snatched the pastry. I thought about it and felt that we should finish it. After all, it's shameful to waste food. Up to you. The little boy sat by the fire, as if he was too lazy to look at her. Helene Vivian lowered her head and ate a piece. When she ate something delicious, she picked it out and left it for him. In the cold and cheerless palace, there was finally some warmth because there was one more person, making this winter not so cold. The next day, when the little boy woke up, he found that there was one more person in his bed. She was different from him. Her whole body was warm, and she gave the blanket to him as if she was afraid that he would freeze at night. There was a small clay pot on the wooden table. The clay pot was still steaming hot, and everything looked so beautiful. For a moment, the little boy felt that everything was very unreal. He had never experienced the word warm. Except for the fact that the palace was uncomfortably hot in the summer. Most of the time, it was cold here, even the food was the same. In his memory, except when his imperial grandfather was here, those people would smile and try to please him. When his imperial grandfather was not here, they would speak coldly. But now, even his hand was being held warmly by someone. He was a little not used to it. Rather than saying that he was not used to it, it was better to say that until now, he had not seen through this woman in front of him. Why did she get close to him? She even didn't hesitate to make up such a story. She said that the two of them would be together in the future. What and what? The little boy moved his fingers and pressed the strands of hair in front of his forehead. His eyes darkened slightly. Everyone in the palace knew that although he was now a prince, there was no difference whether he was there or not. That was why he could not see through her purpose. When Helene Vivian saw that he had woken up, she didn't get up immediately. Instead, she laid on her back elegantly, looking as if she had just woken up. It was so cute that she leaned over and kissed him again. The little boy was speechless. Also, she had the habit of asking for family members at the drop of a hat. No other woman would be as bold as her. Beligaju couldn't help but press on his aching forehead. Come, get up. Helene Vivian didn't have much experience in taking care of children, but she had also been a child. Looking at His Highness's appearance, he should be growing up. At this time, it was the most important time to take care of a child. His nutrition must be balanced. I left the leftover fish head from yesterday and made a pot of fish soup. I also put your favorite mushroom in it. You just got up, so you can drink it while it's hot. Beligaju paused. I like to eat mushrooms. You've always been confused about what you like to eat, but you'll know when you eat it. Helene Vivian stood up as she spoke. The little boy's eyes swept across the food on the wooden table. His voice was indifferent. Where did you get these things? The Imperial kitchen. Helene Vivian curled her lips into a smile. Don't worry, no one will find out. I'm very good at this kind of thing. Although the people in the imperial kitchen checked for poison, they wouldn't check the things in the pot. She took a little here and stole a little there, so no one would notice. After all, she was born in the arms business, so she could avoid some guards. The little boy didn't continue asking. Yesterday, he could tell that her kick wasn't simple. It was rare to see someone who could fight so beautifully. Perhaps even the imperial guards in the palace couldn't do such a fast and accurate side kick. Try it. Is the soup fishy? Hellion Vivian scooped a bowl and handed it to him. His Highness loved to eat fish, but his tolerance for the fishy smell was limited. That was why she added a lot of things to the soup to get rid of the fishy smell. The honey made the fish more tender, the ginger slices and white wine permeated the fish thoroughly, and the mushrooms enhanced the taste. The clay pot had the effect of keeping the fish warm and removing the smell, so he should be able to drink this fish soup. Beligaju took the bowl and tasted it. His indifferent little face immediately changed. There was even a trace of a smile. Woman, you're not useless. Hellion Vivian knew that this was what he liked to drink. His Highness always expressed his love in a different way than others, so she didn't argue with him. She sat on the wooden chair and scooped a bowl of fish soup for herself. The soup was still a little hot, but the hotter the soup, the more delicious it was. The soup had been simmering for a long time, so even the fish bones had melted. Coupled with the tender mushrooms, the taste and texture were extremely good. Although the little boy didn't say anything, he drank 3 bowls in a row. His little face was flushed, and his eyelashes were even longer. Hellion Vivian supported her chin and looked at him. Do you think it's delicious? As long as you agree to go back with me, I'll make it for you every day. The little boy looked up, then took the handkerchief on the side and wiped the corner of his mouth. You can still make it for me if you stay here. Hellion Vivian. You can't say that. You can't take things from the imperial kitchen so casually. This clay pot has been used once, so don't keep it. After saying that, the little boy stood up. At that moment, 2 figures walked in, supporting each other. The 2 figures were also very small. One of them was a girl wearing a maid's uniform, and she looked to be around 9 or 10 years old. The other one was wearing a guard's uniform, and his knee was bleeding. When Hellion Vivian saw the 2 people walking in, she couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. The guard knelt down on one knee and called out to Beligaju, Your Highness. Your leg is still injured, get up. For some reason, Hellion Vivian felt that when Beligaju said those words, his eyes were a little heavy, as if he was hiding something. The maid also walked over and said in a soft voice, Your Highness, this matter isn't Shadow's fault. The Empress just didn't have any other choice, so she lightly hit him twice and punished this servant to recite Buddhist scriptures for an entire night. After all, the Crown Prince didn't show mercy, so we have to give him an explanation. Your Highness, don't worry about this matter. This servant is fine. This Highness understands. Beligaju's voice was very faint, and his eyes were half closed, so no one could see his emotions. Because of this, Wei Wei suddenly raised her head and glanced at those 2 little bean fellows. So it turned out that the bodyguard was a shadow. Then this little maid. Isn't she Bai Luo? Who is this big sister? Bai Luo also noticed the extra person in the palace, so she tilted her head and looked at Hellion Vivian. Chapter 594. Hellion Vivian looked at Yun Biluo's guarded eyes and suddenly smiled. Her eyes were very beautiful, and her voice was neither fast nor slow with a hint of evilness. Me? I'm your future princess. Pfft. Shadow was drinking water, but after hearing this, he spat it out. His first reaction was to look at his master's face. Unfortunately, Bailey Jia Ju's indifferent little face always made people unable to see the slightest bit of emotion. Yun Biluo was stunned and only reacted after a while. What did you say? Princess. Yes. Hellion Vivian smiled and reached out to pat Baligaju's head. Her action was very natural. We've already decided on this matter, but His Highness hasn't thought of how to tell you. After all, you and Shadow are His Highness's people, so it's better to say it later. Since you know, you should also be mentally prepared. If you don't want to think about it, then His Highness won't have to worry about it. Right, Your Highness. Baligaju turned around and looked at her with a pair of deep and bottomless eyes. Hellion Vivian felt a little guilty under his gaze. She bent down and whispered, "Cooperate, I'll make you pork ribs tonight." Shadow was still young and did not know what they were talking about, but His Highness had never allowed anyone to be so close to him, and His Highness actually tolerated someone touching his head. Even the retired emperor did not dare to touch his head. How could this woman be so bold? Wasn't she afraid that His Highness would kill her? Little Shadow was already in a daze. His heart was pounding, fearing that Hellion Vivian would be splattered with blood if he was not careful. Yun Biluo's expression was also a little unpredictable. Her eyes fell on Hellion Vivian's hand, thinking about what His Highness would do next. What she did not expect was that Baligaju did not get angry. Instead, he pulled down the woman's hand, looked at her in shadow, and said faintly, "Both of you can leave first." Seeing this, Yun Biluo clenched her hands under her long sleeves, but did not show anything. Instead, she smiled sweetly, "Yes." Little Shadow also reacted, and respectfully replied, "Yes, sir." The two little people disappeared in front of the door one after another. When no one was around, the little boy turned around and looked at Hellion Vivian's hand. "When did I say I wanted to marry you? You'll have to marry her sooner or later." Hellion Vivian smiled and rubbed his head again. "Why do you care about these details?" The little boy took a deep breath and said, "If you touch me again, I will chop off your claws." Hellion Vivian looked at the sneering little face in front of her and felt that it was too cute. She really wanted to take this kind of child home and raise it. She couldn't help but touch it again. The little boy did not respond. Hellion Vivian was addicted to touching him. She rubbed his head and said sincerely, "Why were you so obedient when you were young? I really couldn't tell. I can't see any reason why you're worthy of my liking." The little boy pressed her hand and narrowed his eyes. "If you touch me again, I won't choose you in the future." Hellion Vivian burst out laughing. "This is fate. I have to choose even if you don't want to. It's useless to threaten me with this kind of thing." "Good, very good." The little boy smiled slowly. "Then let's see if it works when the time comes." Hellion Vivian felt that she was an arms tycoon who had experienced life and death. Logically speaking, it was impossible for her to be intimidated by an 8-year-old child. However, she did not know if it was because she knew His Highness too well. After hearing the little boy's words, she was a little worried about the future changes. When she was cooking at noon, she put a lot of meat in the pot of rice for Baligaju. The little boy looked at her and did not say anything. He lowered his head and ate. Hellion Vivian supported her chin and looked at him with a faint smile. "Do you really need to believe in fortune-telling? The pot of rice is delicious, right?" The little boy ate a piece of fragrant meat. He did not answer but asked in a slow tone, "Besides mentioning that His Highness will choose you, what else did the fortune-telling mention?" Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. "The eldest prince will die this year. The reason is unknown." She knew that was what the little boy wanted to ask. After all, the current Shadow and Yun Biluo were indeed different to him. Because in this palace, there were only two people who shared weal and woe with him. According to His Highness' character, if his people were bullied, he would not just let it go. Naturally, he would care about the enemy. However, what she did not expect was that the little boy laughed and repeated the two words playfully, "Die young." That was really possible because he had been planning to kill the eldest prince since autumn, but it was not the right time yet. Besides, killing a prince was not the same as killing a palace maid. He had some scruples in his heart. Now that he heard Helene Vivian's words, maybe he could give it a try. Helene Vivian looked at his smile and raised her eyebrows. "You don't believe me. He is currently the most favored prince of His Majesty." Beligaju ate another mouthful of pot of rice. This rice was not at all like what he usually ate. It was hot and very fragrant. Helene Vivian smiled. "In the palace, the most taboo thing is to spoil. Your father is suspicious. It may not be a good thing to spoil him too much." The little boy's fingers that were hidden under his long sleeves paused, but his face was blank. "What do you mean?" "Leave it to me." Helene Vivian curved her thin lips. "I have read a lot of books about palace intrigue. It should not be a big deal." The little boy frowned. "What are you going to do? What do you think of the beauty trap?" Helene Vivian leaned close to his little face. "I heard that the eldest prince has no resistance to women." Hearing this, the little boy suddenly laughed. It was a very cold kind of laugh. "If you want to serve the eldest prince, you can just say it. I can send you there now. Then I will kill both of you." Helene Vivian looked at the little boy for a while and touched his face with her hand. "Are you jealous?" The little boy's eyes were cold, but his body was so small, so cold and cute. "Don't be jealous. How can he be compared to you?" Helene Vivian hugged him and took the opportunity to confess. "I went to take a look just now. That person is far less handsome than you. For me, who is obsessed with looks, of course, I will choose the most handsome one." That's right, she was doing things according to the tips on the secret book of chasing wives. Every day, she would confess 10 times and get a response at least once. While His Highness was still young and easy to coax, she had to work harder. It would be too tiring to chase after him when he grew up. Who knew that the little boy was not touched at all? Instead, he stretched out his finger and pointed at her forehead. He pushed her away very calmly and elegantly. His voice was leisurely. "You are so picky about other people's looks." Chapter 595. Helene Vivian. "You're being mean again. What's wrong with her? She's beautiful and rich. Isn't His Highness looking down on people a little too much? If she beat him up now, would someone sue her for bullying a minor? That's why it's better if you don't use your honey trap." The little boy gave her an arrogant look and said coldly, "So that when you're chased out, you won't be able to trace it back to me." Helene Vivian still wanted to say something. The little boy spoke again with an indifferent expression. "Also, your honey trap won't work, it doesn't match." "Why doesn't it match?" Helene Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Didn't they say that the crown prince likes beautiful women?" The little boy looked at her and said, "Because compared to women, the crown prince likes men more." Pang! Little Shadow, who was carrying the cold dishes, slipped and the food in his hands flew out. But this was not as shocking as hearing his master's words. When did the crown prince like men? Why didn't he know? Shadow was still young. Even though he was still loyal to his master, his expression already showed that he was at a loss. It seemed that he wanted to ask Bailey Jiaju and couldn't help but look over at him. "Your Highness, is your leg better?" Beligaju didn't wait for him to ask and interrupted him without looking up. Aning was immediately moved. He held back his tears and said, "It's done, it's done." So your highness, you don't have to slander the crown prince for me anymore. Saying that he likes men is a huge sin. Since it's all better, stay away from the crown prince in the future. Recently, he likes to pick on you. Beligaju put down the bowl and chopsticks in his hands. Shadow nodded as his eyes welled up. He didn't expect his master to care so much about him. Whoa, it couldn't be any better. His heart warmed. He must treat his master better in the future. However, little Shadow didn't know that he had just packed up and left the hall. Hellion Vivian moved closer to the little boy's ear and said mysteriously, "The crown prince likes to pick on little Shadow. Is it what I think it is? What else could it be?" The little boy asked casually. He lowered his eyes and put on the gloves. A smile flashed at the corner of his mouth. "You want to use a honey trap? This highness wants to see just how you're going to use your honey trap this time." Hellion Vivian saw that Zhu-An's attitude was very natural. She didn't think that this was a scam at all. She could only sigh and say, "Then it seems that we need to rethink our plan to deal with the first prince." "No need." The little boy stood up and looked at Hellion Vivian, who was sitting parallel to him on the wooden chair. He pointed at Hellion Vivian and said, "I will be busy these few days. Don't go out and cause trouble. It's best if you don't come into contact with any men." Sweat. What kind of tone was that? No matter how he listened to it, it sounded like a big shot in the underworld giving instructions to his woman. She was clearly the arms tycoon. Also, why did that arrogant expression of his that didn't put anyone in his eyes make her want to beat him up? Hellion Vivian felt that ever since she saw the smaller version of His Highness, her hands had become very itchy. It must be because the other party was too vicious, causing her to become violent. "What? Do you have something to say?" The little boy looked at her condescendingly. Hellion Vivian waved her hand. What else could she say? She couldn't really drag him over and beat him up. Forget it, he was still young. As long as he didn't fool around, she didn't mind letting him have his way. The most important thing was to find a way to clear the obstacles so that he could go back with her quickly. At night, a white fog filled the air. The winter in the north was like this at night. It was so dry and cold that people rarely went out. The river was also frozen solid. Beligaju was still young, so it was almost impossible to find him hiding in the night. But this time, the plan to kill had to be stopped. It wasn't because he found out a secret. It was not a big deal for the prince to have an affair with a palace maid. However, when the first prince was about to make a move, he accidentally said, "Darling, wait a little longer. Wait for this highness. When I ascend the throne, I'll definitely make you an imperial concubine." Really? The palace maid's rosy little face was full of flirtatiousness. The eldest prince couldn't care less. He hugged her and fell into the wild grass at the side. The palace maid was none other than the one who had been delivering cold meals to Beligaju for the past few days. The little boy looked at this scene indifferently and slowly curled his lips. Such a blabbermouth prince, he's not far away from death, Your Highness. Anang and Yunbiluo looked at Beligaju, who was coming from afar. Their eyes were filled with unconcealable worry. They were still young and had almost no martial chi. Their thinking was not as independent as it was when they grew up. They didn't know what His Highness did when he went out at night. But they knew that since a year ago, whenever His Highness went out, someone would die in the palace the next day. In the beginning, they didn't connect this possibility to His Highness. They only understood what was going on when they saw the blood on the boy's body. They were punished by the Empress today, so His Highness must be in a bad mood. It was because of this that they were even more worried about the consequences that His Highness would face if he were to be discovered outside. Fortunately, judging from His Highness's appearance, no one should have seen it. Aning couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief and quickly went up to him. Beligaju's black hood was covered in snow. His handsome little face was very cold at this moment, and there was a kind of dazzling red color in his eyes. Yunbiluo stood beside him, looking very obedient, as if she wanted to reach out and take off his hood. Beligaju only glanced at her and raised his hand to stop her. "There's no need." Yunbiluo looked at him and paused. "Your Highness, the woman who appeared in the palace today, who sent her?" Upon hearing this, Aning raised his head. He also wanted to ask this question. Yunbiluo's choice of words was very good. She was probing. "Look at how bold she is with her words. She's pretty too. We don't have anything here. Why was she sent here? Is she here to spy for information?" Aning frowned. Beligaju took off his cloak. His voice was as cold as water. "You said just now, there's nothing in the palace. Why is she spying for information?" "But the eldest prince has begun to suspect His Highness, and the emperor asked him to show evidence. Maybe this woman is here to get the evidence?" When Yunbiluo was young, she was a little impatient. But at her current age, it was already good that she could come up with such a plan. Besides, Hellion Vivian appeared at a sensitive time. Thinking about it this way, what she did was indeed to lower people's guard. Chapter 596. If that's the case, we'd better be careful when we speak in the palace in case someone tries to trick us. Shadow frowned. Shadow frowned. His Highness's situation was more difficult than any other Highness's. Once he said something wrong, not only would he be punished, he would also bring trouble to His Highness. What the Empress was most unwilling to see was His Highness making a mistake. Take today as an example. It was clear that the first prince's servant had gone too far and bullied His Highness. Shadow merely retaliated, but the first prince made a fuss about it to the emperor. After the emperor heard about it, he would definitely punish the empress, and the empress would be unhappy. In the end, His Highness would have to bear the consequences. Yunbiluo thought the same and nodded her head. The main thing is that His Highness went out at night. We can't let her find out. I'm afraid she'll follow His Highness. By then, some things can't be hidden anymore. Beligaju's hand that was holding the cloak paused for a moment. Then, he raised his hand and put it on again. His voice was calm. "I know what to do about her. All of you can leave now." "Yes." Yunbiluo was a little reluctant. After all, the three of them were used to depending on each other. It was always a little awkward to have such a woman suddenly appear. Moreover, when she came in this morning, she saw the fish soup that the woman made. That kind of fragrance was never seen in this palace. She also wanted to make something delicious for His Highness. However, apart from her bad skills, it was extremely difficult to get something from the imperial kitchen. She did not know how that woman did it. The more Yunbiluo thought about it, the more she felt that the woman was dangerous. She had to be careful. But, the future princess consort. Yunbiluo laughed mockingly. His Highness only had eyes and heart for the Hellion family's beloved daughter. How could he be interested in an old woman who was 8 or 9 years older than him? However, that Miss Hellion did not deserve to be their princess consort. For the past few years, only she and Shadow had stayed by His Highness's side. When had the high and mighty Miss ever paid attention to His Highness? This was good too. Yunbiluo lowered her eyes and smiled faintly. In this way, His Highness could be hers. The night outside the palace grew darker. The moonlight shone down, illuminating a shadow. That shadow was very small, and it was cast on the wall. It looked up at the divine beast that was much taller than it. The divine beast's fur was fiery red, as if it had been burned by fire. The color was dazzling. "Master, why are you letting me out?" The mythical beast is very aggrieved. It has to stay in a cage specially made for it, and under its claws is a big pile of cabbage. It has been eating this stuff for 7 days, and it really can't bear it anymore. It only begs the little boy to let it go, and it will do whatever he wants. In fact, with its strength, this place would not be able to trap it at all. The one who could trap it was the boy in front of it, its one and only master. Beligaju glanced at it and said indifferently, "I've only locked you up for 7 days." Right now, no one knew that he had hunted a fire Qilin. He would wait until his imperial grandfather came back and organized the imperial family to hunt. When that time came, the time would be ripe. It's been 7 days. The fire Qilin looked up at the sky and roared, "Do those people still think that master is a useless prince?" Beligaju curled his lips and handed over the cabbage in his hand. His smile was elegant and bloodthirsty. The game has just begun. The mythical beast stared at the cabbage in front of it and cried, "Master, I'm not hungry yet. Every time it burps, it smells like vegetable leaves. It's such a bad memory." The little boy finally had a conscience and took back his hand. He wiped it with a handkerchief and said, "I've recently found a very interesting prey. When the time comes, I'll lock her up with you." A very interesting prey. The fire Qilin's eyes lit up. Could it be the Tunshin? The little boy shook his head indifferently. "It's not a mythical beast, it's a woman." "A woman?" The fire Qilin looked like it was struck by lightning. "What kind of woman is so unlucky?" The little boy said, "She said that she doesn't like locks. The chain you have here happens to be useful." The fire Qilin was speechless. "Master, have you ever thought that she might dislike the chain even more? Your habit of locking up everything as prey is really unacceptable. Not to mention that the other party is a woman. Ever since the pandemonium was destroyed, it had been afraid of women. However, with its master's personality, it definitely wouldn't care what the other party thought. If it wanted to tie it up, it had to do it." However, what the fire Qilin didn't expect was that the little boy actually frowned and said, "Then what kind of lock do you think she'll like?" "She probably won't like any of them. Even a beast like it doesn't like being locked up, let alone a human." The little boy listened with a cold expression. "Regarding this, I'll communicate with her properly. She has to like it." The fire Qilin was speechless. "Then what's the point of communicating? There's no need at all. Master, you actually want to tie her up, right? She's a bit weird, but at least she's not annoying." The little boy tidied up his black gloves. "The trouble is that she's very likely to be sent by those 2 groups of people. If we want to lock her up, it will take some time." The fire Qilin paused. "Since her identity isn't safe, it's best not to do anything. There's nothing to be safe about." The little boy looked up. His eyes were deep and cold, an elegant aura seeping out from between his brows. On the contrary, his voice was not loud, but it was unforgettable. "As long as you kill the person who sent her, she will be mine." Hearing the little boy's words, the fire Qilin's slender eyes narrowed. According to its master's personality, if he found out that the woman betrayed him, not only would the person who sent her die, even the woman wouldn't be kept alive. Not only did its master's viciousness not weaken because he lost his memories of his previous life, but it was also because of this. As a human, compared to when he was in the demon world, he was even more unpredictable. Although he was just a child, his hands were already stained with blood when he was young. This couldn't be separated from the environment he grew up in. The Imperial Palace was a place that could make people not look like humans, and demons not look like demons. If it was the previous master, people would know to avoid him at first sight. But the current master was wearing a perfect disguise, and under the disguise was a deadly poison that was more dangerous than anyone else. At this time, there was actually a woman who dared to approach him. I really don't know what will happen to her. Chapter 597. The next day, Balikaju was awakened by the warm aroma of food. He raised one hand and placed it in front of his forehead, as if he was not used to it. Helian Wei Wei put down the vegetable and pig liver porridge in her hand and glanced at the figure lying on the bed. That person's body was small, but he still had the air of a noble. Even when he slept, his posture was standard, with both hands placed in front of his body. When he saw her coming in, he moved and turned his head. A pair of deep eyes matched with his black hair. That appearance was extremely handsome. Helian Vivian was engrossed in watching. The little boy pursed his thin lips and said in a mocking voice, "Idiot." Helian Vivian was speechless. She had not even said anything and he had already called her an idiot. How was she going to continue living like this? Helian Wei Wei was preparing to teach the other party a lesson, such as hanging him up in a fancy way or something. However, she saw the little boy suddenly smile after scolding her. That handsome little face instantly made Helian Wei Wei stop. Looking at such a face, she really could not bring herself to do it, so she simply dismissed the idea. She ate a mouthful of porridge and said, "You should get up and eat some porridge too. After that, we'll discuss how to deal with the eldest prince." The little boy glanced at her and reached out to tug at his clothes. He coughed twice in discomfort. After coughing, even his breathing was a little heavy. "I don't have an appetite. Go out after eating and help me close the door." "You don't have an appetite." Helian Vivian realized that the little boy's face was abnormally red. She reached out with her left hand and touched him. "Why is it so hot? I will call the imperial physician." The little boy pushed her hand away. "No need. Your cold is very serious. It doesn't look like it just happened." Helian Vivian glanced at the wet cloak hanging by the window and smiled. "But if you don't want the imperial physician to find out that you went out last night, I can help you lower your temperature." The little boy's fingers paused and his eyes narrowed. He smiled again. "It seems that I have to keep my cloak in the future. I didn't mean to test you." Helian Vivian curled her thin lips. "I just want to tell you that you can trust me more. You're still young and it's not safe to go out at night. If you want to do anything in the future, just call me." The methods in the imperial palace had always been dirty. Her little highness obviously hadn't awakened yet. He couldn't even deal with a palace maid. If he went out at night and encountered something, how could a child like him deal with it? Helian Vivian was worried, but at the same time, she felt that she had a great responsibility. She reached out to touch his forehead and said, "Take off your clothes first. I'm going to prepare something." The little boy watched as Helian Vivian left, then glanced at the damp cloak. The warmth in his eyes turned to ice. He didn't expect her to be so smart. It seemed that he couldn't leave these traces behind in the future. "Why haven't you taken off your clothes?" When Helian Vivian came in with hot water and wine, the little boy did not listen to her. Instead, he reached out and took a fur coat, as if he was going to go out. "I still have to pay my respects to my mother." He spoke in an even tone. "I could have gone later. Now that you've woken me up, I might as well go directly." Helian Vivian reached out to stop him. "You don't have to pay your respects every day. You're sick now. Get your illness treated first." "Sister, don't stop His Highness." Yun Biluo walked in. Although she looked small, she was calculative. "You're new here. You don't know the things in the imperial palace. If you don't pay your respects to the Empress, it's fine. But others will think that His Highness doesn't follow the rules in the imperial palace because of the retired emperor's favor." Helian Wei Wei looked at Yun Biluo, then at the pale-faced and emotionless little boy. He was still putting on his clothes without any pause in his movements. Yun Biluo was very attentive. She stood beside the little boy and tidied the back of his collar. Hellion Vivian smiled. Her voice was neither clear nor calm. If His Highness goes to pay his respects today, the Empress won't have time to care about His Highness. What do you mean? After all, Yunbiluo was the person chosen by the Empress to be sent to Beligaju. After hearing Hellion Vivian's words, she suddenly turned her head around. Hellion Vivian sat down with her legs slightly crossed. Her eyes were fixed on Beligaju. Yesterday, the Emperor went to the Wanfeng Palace on a whim. Thinking about it carefully, the Emperor hasn't been to the Empress's palace for more than half a month. It's inevitable that he'll spend more time there. Does His Highness think that it's appropriate for you to go to the Wanfeng Palace at this time? Why not? Yunbiluo thought a lot. His Highness hasn't seen His Majesty for a long time. It's good for him to see His Majesty. After all, he was his own son. Even if His Majesty didn't value him, he wouldn't let His Highness be like this. If His Highness went to see His Majesty when he was sick, wouldn't it show that His Highness wasn't doing well? In that case, His Majesty might be angry and investigate those who bullied His Highness. Yunbiluo didn't say the latter part, but Hellion Vivian and Beligaju both understood what she meant. It was undeniable that Yunbiluo's idea was good. However, His Highness was still young. It was just an idea without considering the actual situation. Hellion Weiwei propped up her chin and smiled lazily. I don't know if His Majesty will miss His Highness, but His Highness is already so sick, yet he still forced himself to go. I'm afraid that His Majesty will have a lot of other ideas after seeing him. Don't play tricks in front of a superior, unless your tricks are better than his. His Majesty has seen this kind of trick of self-injury once or twice every day in the palace, so it's not rare. Sister, what you said is just your guess. Yunbiluo's expression froze for a moment before she smiled again. Moreover, His Highness is really sick. How can it be a trick of self-injury? Hellion Vivian looked at her and stood up. Her voice was calm. Then I'll say something that I'm not guessing. The Empress has been waiting for His Majesty to go to Wanfeng Palace for half a month. His Majesty finally went, but now he's still there. If His Highness goes there at this time, it's equivalent to interrupting her good deed. Based on your Empress's character, how do you think she will treat His Highness? Yunbiluo's face turned pale. She didn't need to answer this question to know the answer. Everyone in the palace knew that the Empress only had eyes for His Majesty. She would do anything for His Majesty. Why do you think His Majesty went to the Empress's place last night? Hellion Vivian smiled coldly. It's all because of His Highness's needle wounds. His Majesty saw that His Highness was angry, so he couldn't beat him. If he beat His Majesty, he wouldn't be able to explain to the retired Emperor. So, he coaxed the Empress to beat him. Although he didn't say it explicitly, every time His Highness was abused by the Empress, the Emperor's attitude was right. It was obvious that he was very satisfied with the Empress' way of doing things. How could you let His Highness play the trick of self-injury in front of a person who doesn't care about His Highness? Do you think it's effective? Chapter 598. Yunbiluo was a little girl after all. Her eyes turned red when she heard what Hellion Vivian said. I just want to help His Highness, don't I? You want to help him? It would have been better if Yunbiluo did not mention it. Now that she did, Hellion Vivian was filled with anger. She smiled, but her eyes were cold. You're a girl trained by the Empress. It's impossible that you're not there when the Empress takes action. Why don't you take a few hits for His Highness? Yunbiluo, your love is really limited. This was what Hellion Vivian was most annoyed about. Yunbiluo was obviously a few years older than Beligaju. Even if she could not bear the Empress's identity, she could still help to take a few hits for him. However, looking at the current situation, Yunbiluo could only stand aside when she was with the Empress. That's the Empress. Not to be outdone, Yunbiluo raised her small face and said impatiently, "You don't have any sense of seniority, you'll only bring harm to His Highness." Helian Weiwei laughed when she heard that. "I'm scared because I'm scared. Don't talk to me about seniority. Yunbiluo, let me tell you this, no matter who the other party is, they can't hurt my husband. Even the emperor must be killed. She just needed to use the right method. Because of this, when the person grew up, he would stain his hands with blood and become a demon step by step. If only one of these people could take a hit for her, Her Highness, the man she cared about and wanted to give the world to, would not be unconscious until now." Helian Vivian knew that she was venting her anger, but she was really angry. She had never spoken so inappropriately. Her eyes were frighteningly bright. Beligaju looked at her and was obviously stunned. She really looked like a little fox who had exploded into a ball of fur. She was angry because of him. Beligaju had never felt this way before. Someone was angry because of him. Almost everyone in the palace knew why his mother called him to Wanfeng Palace. No one would feel sorry for him because of this. No one would even think of standing up for him. Beligaju knew how dark the palace was since he was young. Between people, it was just about using and being used. There was no such thing as sincerity. He was already used to it, so there was nothing he couldn't adapt to. When he reached the top, these people would just be a game in his hands. Therefore, he really couldn't understand why the other party would get angry over him. "Your Highness." Yunbiluo turned her head to look at Beligaju, who had a blank expression on his face. Tears welled up in her eyes. "I don't understand why my sister questioned me like this the moment she arrived, but everything I did was for your own good." Beligaju didn't look at her. Instead, he said to Helian Vivian, "You, come with me." All of a sudden, Helian Vivian was like a punctured balloon. She lowered her eyes and looked at the back view in front of her. Although she knew it would be like this, it still hurt to experience it personally. If he had grown up, he would have asked Yunbiluo to get lost. However, there were no ifs. He hadn't grown up, he was still so young. How luxurious the palace was how dark and gloomy he was. Even his coughs were intermittent and restrained. That was why he trusted the people around him so much. In this aspect, the newcomer couldn't compare to him. When Helian Vivian thought of this, she felt a little depressed and lowered her head even more. This was the scene that Shadow saw when he came over. She was clearly taller than His Highness by half a body, but she was following behind His Highness dejectedly, as if she was going to be taken home by His Highness to be taught a lesson. As a shadow, he would never ask too much about his master's affairs. However, looking at Yunbiluo's slightly curled expression, he felt that something was not quite right, so he reminded her, "Don't be too obvious about it. His Highness won't like it if you do that. I'm against her." Yunbiluo blinked and tears fell. "Do you know what she said about me in front of His Highness just now? She asked why I didn't block for His Highness when he was being beaten. That was the Empress, how could I block for her? She was obviously trying to drive a wedge between us. In this way, His Highness would be more certain that she was a spy sent by the eldest prince. It's a good thing." Shadow heard this and stopped in his tracks. He said in a steady voice, "If I was there, I would block for her." That was the loyalty he should have as a servant. Even if it would kill him, he would still do it. Yunbiluo was stunned for a moment. She chuckled, "All of them, you make it sound so nice. Would it be useful for her to block for a while?" His Highness wouldn't want her to block for him because that would be too stupid. However, the time to pay respects is almost here. What is His Highness thinking? Yunbiluo looked at the tightly shut door and bit her thin lips hard. In the hall, Beligaju coughed twice and turned to look at Hellion Vivian. His voice was calm. Didn't you say that you want to cool me down? Did he mean that he would listen to her and not pay respects? Hellion Vivian's eyes lit up again. She picked up the alcohol and cotton balls that she had prepared earlier. Go lie down on the couch first and take off your clothes. You. The little boy stopped talking. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. What? Why are you angry because of me? The little boy asked in the end. Hellion Vivian widened her eyes. How can I not be angry? You're usually so arrogant that I can't wait to pinch you to death. I can't even bear to touch you. In the end, your mother. What's wrong with her? She felt that the look in the boy's eyes was a little strange. Can't wait to pinch me to death. The little boy threw the outer shirt that he had just unbuttoned aside. His action was very cold. So you have such thoughts. Hellion Vivian felt a chill on her scalp from his stare. She raised her lips and smiled. Can you listen to the main point? I'm clearly expressing my love for you. Upon hearing that, the originally cold little boy turned his face away and no longer looked at Hellion Vivian. Are you always like this? Like what? Hellion Vivian began to find faults in herself. What's wrong with her? The little boy's voice seemed to have calmed down. You always talk about love. Even to others. How is that possible? Hellion Vivian hugged the little boy and touched his forehead. She took the opportunity to confess, I'm only like this to you. I'm very cold to others and directly ask them to leave. The little boy paused and turned back to look at her. His long and beautiful eyes were neither cold nor warm, as if no light could enter them. His voice was also cold. What are you projecting? You want me to ask Yunbiluo to leave? Chapter 599. Hellion Vivian. How could he guess that? Isn't a certain highness a little too smart? However, this highness won't chase her away. The little boy sat on the bed. His face was very pale and he looked very tired. Don't cause trouble. Don't go out at night, especially to the One Phoenix Palace. Hellion Vivian saw that his voice was hoarse, so she didn't say anything else. She dipped the cotton ball in wine and brought it over. The little boy stopped her and grabbed her wrist. He was very stubborn. Promise this highness that you won't go to the One Phoenix Palace. I know, I promise you. Hellion Vivian was hurt by his grip, so she stroked his head to comfort him. The little boy's eyes darkened and he leaned on her body. His forehead pressed against her shoulder and his small body said in a muffled voice, my head hurts. He was acting coquettishly. He was definitely acting coquettishly. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and kissed his hair. The fever is too serious. It won't hurt in a while. I'll take off your clothes first. Why do you always want to take off this highness clothes? The little boy raised his head and looked at her. His eyes were a little golden. After a while, he calmly defined her. Okay, I'm okay. Hellion Vivian stroked his hair while taking off his clothes. The little boy finally cooperated. Halfway through taking off his clothes, his long eyebrows wrinkled. There's no taste in my mouth. It's always like this when you have a cold. Hellion Vivian leaned over and kissed the corner of his mouth. I'll make some red date soup for you to drink later. The little boy was stunned for a moment. Then, he slowly lifted the blanket and covered his face with it. He even buried his head under the blanket. His handsome face started to redden a little and he scolded, impudent. Okay, I'm impudent. Hellion Vivian coaxed him. Then, she soaked a towel in hot water and covered his forehead. The little boy closed his eyes, as if he didn't have any emotions. All that was left was a domineering voice. Don't randomly kiss people in the future. Who cares about her again? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and rubbed his arm with a cotton ball. She didn't respond. The little boy immediately opened his eyes and said faintly, "Say yes." "Yes." Hellion Vivian smiled lazily. How could he be so controlling from a young age? The little boy nodded. "Since you promised me, you better keep your promise. If I see you kissing someone else, you know what the consequences will be." "What consequences can there be?" Hellion Vivian didn't care at all. Little Wimp was still young, so he couldn't do anything to her. The little boy glanced at her and said slowly, "The consequence is that I will never go back with you." Hellion Vivian immediately sat up straight and said seriously, "I will never kiss anyone. I won't even touch anyone." As if satisfied with her attitude, the little boy slowly closed his eyes again. "If you do well, I'll give you a gift in a few days. As long as you promise to go back with me, it will be the biggest gift for me." Hellion Vivian grabbed his hand and was absolutely serious. The little boy pulled his hand back. "It's not that kind of gift. I'm giving you a place to stay." "A place to stay?" Hellion Vivian was confused. The little boy smiled as if he was very happy. "You'll definitely like it. Since you said so, I'll look forward to it." In fact, she still didn't understand why he wanted to give her a place to stay. Hellion Vivian reached out and changed the little boy's handkerchief. When she lowered her head again, Beligaju had turned his face away as if he was asleep. Hellion Vivian's movements became gentler. Knowing that alcohol had a cooling effect, she wiped his fingers more. "Your Highness." Yun Biluo was still standing outside the door and couldn't see what was going on inside. She called out a few times but there was no response, so she couldn't help but raise her voice. Hellion Vivian got up and walked out of the door. Then, she closed the door and looked at the little girl in front of her with cold eyes. Yun Biluo didn't look at her and continued to raise her voice. "Your Highness." She didn't expect that the other party would suddenly grab her neck. The strength was very gentle, but it was filled with a strong murderous aura. Hellion Wei Wei's thin lips curved, smiling mischievously. "Younger sister Yun, I'm a person with a bad temper. Especially when I hear noise, my temper will be even worse. When I'm angry, I like to kill people. His Highness is asleep and can't stand your noise. You'd better be quiet, do you understand?" Even though she had been in the palace for a long time, she had never seen a woman who could make people tremble from the bottom of their hearts. She was so scared that she trembled. You. Don't be agitated, don't be agitated." Hellion Vivian looked at her with a faint smile. "You're trying so hard to make me deal with you because you want to sow discord between me and him. He's never tolerated anyone who hurt the people around him. If I deal with you, he won't be happy. That's why you're still alive." As she spoke, she patted Yun Biluo's little face gently. "Sister Yun, you're smart, but do you remember what I told you? Don't play tricks in front of the superior. Even if I don't deal with you, someone else will." Hellion Vivian let go of her hand as soon as she finished speaking. Yun Biluo looked like she had lost her soul. Her eyes were bloodshot and her lips were pale. She fell to the ground and a strong sense of fear washed over her like a tidal wave. This woman, she even knew what she was thinking. At that moment, Yun Biluo felt an unprecedented fear. No. She must tell His Highness what just happened. But in the palace, one couldn't enter the bedroom without the permission of the master. The wooden door in front of her was closed again. Yun Biluo clenched her fists so hard that they turned blue. She was originally a palace maid who served. When His Highness didn't say that he wouldn't pay his respects, she could only wait outside. It was freezing cold. In a short while, her head was covered with snowflakes. Yun Biluo couldn't stand it anymore. She pushed open the wooden door forcefully. Her eyes were red as if she had been greatly wronged. She knelt on the ground with a thud. "Your Highness," as if he was awakened by the noise, the little boy slowly opened his eyes and sat up. He looked at Yunbiluo condescendingly. His little face was so pale that there was almost no color in it, but it couldn't hide the elegance he exuded. Hellion Vivian only paused when Yunbiluo came in. She then continued to cook the brown sugar water in the casserole lazily while fanning herself with the fan in her hand. Yunbiluo bit her thin lips tightly. She turned her head and looked at Hellion Vivian. "Sister, did I do something wrong? Is that why you hate me?" Chapter 600. Hellion Vivian did not speak. She supported her chin with one hand and looked at her with a smile. Yunbiluo felt goosebumps all over her body. After taking a deep breath, she looked up with reddened eyes. "Even if you hate me, you should at least send a message to His Highness. It's so cold today. Isn't it too much for me to stand outside like a fool? Who allowed you to come in without my permission?" The little boy interrupted her indifferently. Yunbiluo was stunned. Her eyes widened slowly. Your Highness, get out." These 3 words were neither cold nor warm. Yunbiluo knew that she broke the rules of her master in a moment of anger. However, she did not expect that His Highness would not listen to a single word she said. "Your Highness." Yunbiluo still wanted to say something. The little boy looked at her coldly. "It seems that you haven't stood there long enough. Think carefully about whether I should go greet you or not. Don't cry here. I can tell whether your tears are real or not." What did he mean? Yunbiluo's expression changed. Her fingers were trembling. Hellion Vivian walked over and laughed in her ear. "I told you, I don't need to teach you a lesson." Yunbiluo realized that she had been tricked. She originally wanted to provoke Hellion Vivian so that His Highness would no longer trust this woman. However, in the end, she was the one who was provoked. She was also the one whom His Highness began to distrust. Yunbiluo clenched her fists but did not dare to make a sound. She only bit her lips and said to Beligaju, "Yes." Then, she dragged her 2 heavy legs and returned to her original position. The cold wind blew past her face like a knife. She had never suffered like this before. Her whole body was cold as if she had fallen into an ice cellar. However, she could not leave and could only endure the cold. The little boy retracted his gaze, raised his hand, and pinched his forehead. Then, his gaze fell on Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian immediately confessed, "I can't stand being bullied. She set me up, so I have to set her up. If you want to blame someone, blame the people around you for thinking too much. Tell me, I've been so good to you, but you're always suspicious of me. You can't be like this. You have to know how to be grateful," and, as she spoke, Hellion Vivian felt that the atmosphere around her was too quiet. It was so quiet that her scalp felt numb. When she raised her head, she saw the little boy looking at her mockingly. The coldness in his eyes was very obvious. Hellion Vivian cleared her throat and shut her mouth. "Are you done?" The little boy smiled, but there was no warmth in his smile. Hellion Vivian was eager to try. "Actually, I haven't. You can try saying one more sentence. See if I will ask you to scram too." When the little boy curled his lips, there was always an indescribable charm. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes and threw the bowl in her hand. Then, she took a deep breath and said, "Drink the red date soup." The little boy did not expect her to have such a big reaction. His fingers stiffened. At that moment, he thought that she would turn around and leave. "Don't mention the word scram to me in the future." Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes. "You can't bear to ask me to scram. When you grow up, you will only lock people up." No matter whether you're angry or not, you will only be moody. So, I can't scram. I have to bring you back. Anyway, pride is not worth much. I'll let you trample on it. Hearing this, the little boy paused and drank a mouthful of the red date soup. He was unprecedentedly obedient. Hellion Vivian smiled and hugged him. Let's continue to lower the temperature. It'll be faster this way. The little boy coughed a few times. His cheeks were overflowing with a layer of red. His face was cold, but he did not push Hellion Vivian away. Prey needed to be comforted. Since she liked to hug him, he would let her hug him for a while. There was no other master who was more considerate than him. Who cares if he grew up or not? He was him. If she wanted a mature and powerful man, he could give her that now. The little boy's head was heavy as he thought. He held Hellion Vivian's hand tightly. As long as she did not leave, he could give her anything. This sleep was very good. If it was not for the hurried footsteps outside the door, Beligaju would not have woken up so quickly. When he woke up, his palm was still warm. This made him feel that everything was good. He raised his hand and covered her with a blanket. Then, he stood up and walked out of the door. Your Highness. When Aning saw him come out, he said anxiously, the eldest prince went to the emperor and said that you. What did he say? The little boy did not speak. When Hellion Vivian heard the sound, she narrowed her eyes. She did not know why, but she suddenly had a bad feeling. Aning lowered his head and said in a trembling voice, he said that your highness is sinister and vicious. The eunuch by his side was killed by your highness. Your highness is eyeing the position of the crown prince. That's why you hurt the people around him. The current Bailey Jia Ju could not bear such an accusation at all. When he grew up, he still had martial qi and the protection of the Emperor Emeritus. Now that the Emperor Emeritus was not in the capital, he was a child without any relatives. How could he resist? Was the first prince trying to take his life? I understand. The little boy said expressionlessly. After he said it, what was my father's reaction? Aning shook his head. This subordinate does not know what the emperor's reaction was, but the news of the eldest prince complaining to the emperor has spread in the palace. Your Highness, shouldn't you make a trip to the emperor? No, you can't. Wei Wei's pair of eyes slightly sunk. The emperor has always been suspicious. The more this kind of situation is, the more we can't say anything. Just treat this matter as a joke, and that's enough. No one would believe that an unarmed and defenseless little boy would kill an adult eunuch. If your highness went now, it would only draw the emperor's attention. Hearing this, the little boy turned to look at her. Hellion Vivian thought he did not believe her, so she said seriously, you can't let the eldest prince slander you. The little boy nodded, but no one knew what he was thinking. After listening to Hellion Vivian's words, he did not go anywhere. He stayed in the hall to recuperate and did not go out for 3 days. During these 3 days, Yun Biluo was much more well-behaved. But when she looked at her aching legs again, her eyes were filled with hatred. She found an opportunity to tell the Empress everything about Hellion Vivian. The Empress had never cared about her gloomy son, but she didn't like him to do anything that was out of her control. Although he didn't come to greet her today and didn't ruin her plans, making her in a good mood, this new palace maid was really meddling too much. Thinking of this, the Empress put down the rouge in her hand and asked casually, how does the palace maid look? Yun Biluo's eyes flashed. Oval face, a pair of bright eyes, kind of seductive. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.